Call to order the regular meeting of the Nashoba Regional School Committee, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So you can rise and join me if you don't mind muting, that would be helpful. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so first item on our agenda is public comment. I've had nobody reach out to me for public comments. We're gonna go right past that one. We're gonna move on to the consent agenda. And Amy, if you have the motion that Alita sent, you can go ahead and make that motion.
I do. I move to approve the consent agenda of January 15th, 2025, excluding the Hale Middle School donation acceptance request.
So I'll second that. And then just as a quick note, everybody, we pulled that donation out of the consent agenda because it was premature and we need to Kirk needs to revisit a couple of things on that. So that's why we're pulling that out of the posted consent agenda. All right, so are there any questions or comments about what is included in the consent agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So we're going to go ahead with a roll call vote. So Amy Cohen.
Yes.
Myself, yes. Scott?
Yes.
Amy Vessels?
Yes.
Shondor?
Yes.
Robin?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Jackie?
Yes.
And Lindsay on the consent agenda? Yes, she says.
Yes, not sure if my audio is working yet. Yes.
There we go. You're on.
Okay, okay.
All right, everybody, that the consent agenda has been approved. With the school committee chairperson update, there's nothing that I have to offer beyond what is already in the agenda. And so cruising right along, I'm wondering if we have our student representatives here with us tonight. I don't see them. If they arrive, I will be happy to interrupt the agenda as long as the committee has no objection with their update. But Kirk, do you know if they plan on coming?
Madam Chair, I'm frankly wondering that as we have continued to build this as a one-item meeting for the budget, that they did not come this evening.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. Fair enough. I'm sure with midterms creeping up on them, they have plenty to do. So we'll hear from Ava and Ryan next time.
I think Gabe is the manager of the wrestling team, and I know there's a wrestling match tonight, so that's probably where she's at.
Oh, very good. Well, good luck to all of them. All right. Look at us, guys. Crushing the clock right now. We're going to move forward. Hopefully, Kirk is ready for this superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at two screens. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, as you know, we talked about tonight being a budget-specific meeting. However, I do feel it's important to update the committee and our community regarding the cybersecurity breach that we've notified our community about in recent days. So on January 8th, we alerted our community that we had received notice that hackers accessed PowerSchool SIS, which we use to manage student records, grades, attendance, and enrollment, using a compromised credential. But PowerSchool has confirmed that the stolen data primarily contains contact details such as names and addresses. We remain extremely concerned about this breach and the initial lack of transparency by PowerSchool. The company has promised to share a completed third-party investigation by the end of next week. So as we look at this, I've also included a copy of the information, truncated slightly from what went out to the community last week. But we're continuing to work with PowerSchool as we're very concerned about this data breach and looking for answers and confirmations on exactly which data sets in the Nashoba Regional School District were compromised. I do know that there were alert fields. These are alert fields like pickup alerts, accommodation alerts, medical alerts, discipline alerts that could possibly be identifying information, but it's not the kind of information like social security numbers that would cause folks to do harm in that direction. On the topic of social security numbers, we're looking to get some confirmation from Preschool on this as well. It has been the practice of Nashoba Regional School District not to collect social security numbers from students and employees for the SIS system. So that being said, we did have just a handful of social security numbers reaching all the way back to 2006, which is around about the time when Preschool was introduced to the district. And so my guess is maybe that was part of the launch mechanism, but we're making an attempt to reach out to those folks specifically regarding that access. And it was something around the range of 40 individuals. So for all of those that are associated with the school system today, there are no social security numbers unless they were part of that initial moment in 2006. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there to the committee because I did have a couple of questions come my way about that. And before I move on to talk about the budget, I wanted to pause on that item to take any questions.
Shondor.
I do work at a school impacted by this. Shocking. Have you sought legal counsel around notification requirements?
Yeah, we've been consulting with our legal counsel, and our legal counsel, frankly, has contacted Preschool as well. And so there's communications happening there. As a matter of fact, that contact, I believe, went out 20 minutes after the webinar, notification webinar happened. So our attorneys were ready to go. And of course, they're acting on behalf of all the clients they represent in Massachusetts, which is quite numerous. And Preschool is the most utilized SIS in Massachusetts.
Excellent. Glad to hear they're on top of it.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we are about to get here to the main event, and that is the FY26 budget workshop. This is an annual event, which the school committee hosts no longer on a early Saturday morning, the way that we used to. But this evening, hopefully you guys all have a comfortable seat. Lots of important information is about to be shared with us. And so, Kirk, I will turn it over to you pretty much for the duration here. So take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before we pull up the slide deck, I do want to take a moment to just let you know of some activity today regarding the budget. I added a piece in the superintendent's report just to document the steps that have made thus forward. Earlier today, I did send out a letter to our local officials, notifying them of the budget meeting tonight and the approach that we are taking in designing this budget. So the content of that email is in the superintendent's report. A parallel email was also sent out to our faculty and staff. And so they are aware of this evening's budget presentation. And Madam Chair, I am currently drafting a parallel letter to go to each of our 5 state representatives as we are working on this budget process. And I will have that communication to our state representatives by the end of the week. So with that being said, I would ask Mr. Mulcairn, would you mind pulling up the slide deck, please? Excuse me. Okay, there we go.
Is that coming through okay for everybody?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. So welcome everyone. And to those of you that this is a return engagement for the budget process, we will be replicating the methodology we have used in recent years and presenting this initial budget to you. For those of you that are new, this is the budget in totality, and we'll talk more about that approach in future slides. But the budget design process is a process that involves many players. And so I would like to turn it over to Mr. Mulcairn. And he can introduce the members of our team this year and explain to you their roles in the budget construction process. Mr. Mulcairn. Rosh, you're on mute. There we go.
I lost my toolbar of all things amongst my many open tabs for today. So thank you for your patience. And thank you to the school committee for the opportunity this evening. So this is our leadership team within the district. Obviously, the superintendent's office is Superintendent Downing and our assistant superintendent, Laura Friend, as well as our amazing and helpful Alita Masterson, who quite honestly, at this point of the year, just fields me coming in and saying, I need an hour with Kirk. I need a half an hour with Kirk. We need to schedule this. So that is her major and important contribution. Our cabinet team you can see here, obviously our Director of Facilities, Rob Frieswick, our Director of Health, Wellness, and Safety, Mariah Zwicker, our Director of Human Resources, Jess Murdoch, Director of Student Services, Royanne Mensch, Technology Manager Sue Chi, and our Communications Specialist, Bridget Hannigan. So obviously each of these department members submits their budget, but goes through extensive conversations with myself and the superintendent with regards to their presented budget. Bridget has been extremely helpful this year in doing all the formatting and aligning of the slides as we continue to prep for this evening, and will continue to with our other budget updates. Our building-based administrative team, we have Lenore Zavalik, who is our center school principal, Joel Bates, the Sawyer principal, Mr. Grady, the Hale Middle School principal, Mr. O'Shea, the Burbank Middle School principal, Mr. Blanchard, the MRE elementary principal, Dr. Kate Boynton, who is our high school principal, as well as our athletics director, Tanya Rich. So a couple of pieces on this. As you're aware, those of you who've been on the committee, we went to a per pupil method for K-8. The high school is separate from that. But again, we still meet with each one of our principals to talk about all of their requests and walk through their budgets and make sure everything is tight, as well as at the high school. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. I do meet with Dr. Boynton and every one of the department heads to go through their submitted budgets as well. So moving on, I'd also like to thank our office, Renan Asusau and Kylie Harris, for their help in preparation for tonight, as well as our treasurer, Victoria Chartier. I also like to thank the HR department under the leadership of Jessica Murdoch for their assistance preparing the budget this evening. As you're aware, salaries and benefits play a big role in our budget, so having their information and having those conversations is critical. Our timeline. So in very small green check marks on the right-hand side, you can see all the activities that we've completed to date with regards to budget preparation. The big pieces of this are obviously our budget work with the principals and the directors for their non-salary requests, but as well as their personnel requests. So we've hit our benchmarks, and on that yellow highlight, that's where we are today. And despite all of the work that we have done so far, we know that we have great work to do ahead with all of the budget updates coming forward to the school committee. The governor's proposed budget should be out shortly, which will greatly impact our proposed budget, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on this evening. Budget and warrant will continue to review and ask finer questions throughout the process and throughout the spring, as well as we have our important joint FinCom and advisory meeting and our public hearing on the budget. Going to move ahead. And now I would like to introduce our amazing assistant superintendent, Laura Friend.
I'm not sure about the adjective there. I think it's an adjective, not an adverb. Thank you, Mr. Mulcairn. It is an honor to help support our presentation efforts and really help kick us off with our FY26 budget request. I'm going to speak quickly to the next 4 slides, which just provide an overview of our mission, vision, value, and theory of action, which we talk about in abundance during every school committee meeting. But as a reminder, 3 years ago, our mission statement was developed and is provided for you here. The mission statement really serves as the cornerstone of our work. It has served and will continue to serve as a roadmap, and our mission articulates our purpose. As we have done for the past 3 years, our budgetary requests are shaped by our efforts to actualize this mission, our purpose on behalf of our students. And in large part, you will see that requests are directly aligned to strategic objectives and initiatives outlined in our strategic plan. Next slide, Mr. Mulcairn. This is our vision for our students and for our faculty, and that is to be your best self, pave your path, and impact the world. And the vision is aspirational. It is what we hope for, particularly for our students, and we hope to create and aim for that learning experience K-12. Our goal is for our students to develop their own unique set of strengths, to be confident and self-directed, and with a goal of preparing them to make meaningful connections to society when they leave us. Next slide. Here we have our values. Our values are intricately connected to our mission and our vision. They serve as the fundamental principles that help us with decision-making and guide our actions. At Nashoba, we value academic achievement and growth in a collaborative and safe environment where each and every member sees and believes that they belong. Next slide. Our theory of action works to operationalize our school district mission and vision and our values. It serves as the bridge and the roadmap for our strategic plan. It really serves as the how, if you will. The budget presented before you this evening works to reflect our mission, vision, values, and theory of action. And as mentioned, the requests truly reflect in large part specific objectives and initiatives to implement our strategic plan on behalf of our students as we enter into year 4 of our strategic plan next year. I'm going to turn it over to Director Rowlandson.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And as we begin this work and keep our vision in mind, we are reminded that we have to keep equality, which is treating everybody the same. So we look at our numbers based on the administration, the number of guidance counselors and students we have sitting in each one of our schools, and based on our grade size. But equally as important is our equity work, which is when we look at that equality, it's the difference that students really need extra supports to meet their unique needs, to achieve a fair outcome for them. And this is where we start to discuss or really dive into IEP processes, recommended services for programmings, what our English language learners need and are required to have, and of course, looking at our multi-tiered system of support to really level the playing field for a lot of our students in the classroom every day. And that this is just as important of a vision when we look at building the budget for the next year. And now turning it over to Superintendent Downing.
Thank you, Mr. Mancha. I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about the process tonight that we'll be going through in this workshop. I've outlined up front, right at the top, the operational increase presented tonight will not be the budget presented to our communities for approval. This is just the beginning of the process. And so what I mean by that is we have crafted a budget here that includes the aggregate of the asks that our department and building leaders have brought to the table. This is in response to our committee asking us questions previously of what positions did we not bring to the table because we were in budget limitations before. We've included those here so that you know what those requests are. And we recognize that as we develop this budget, that those requests may not be funded. And we recognize that ahead of time. But we include them here so you know what those are. Also, Mr. Mulcairn will review with tonight the FY25 financial information that's used in the construction of this budget while we await new information, including a big piece, the governor's proposed budget and the cherry sheets we were received that has important financial information. We will be using the FY25 numbers as those baseline numbers. We know that those numbers will increase by law according to Chapter 70 regulations, and so that'll be reflected in the January 29th presentation. We did receive notice today that the governor's budget should be released on January 22nd. If you recall, that's about a month earlier than Governor Healy's first year in office. So we're grateful to have that time to work through this budget season. We're also tonight going to frame the impact on assessments. The numbers that you're going to see on the assessments are going to be quite large, and we know those assessments numbers will be reduced through the budget season process. But we illustrate them here so that you can get a sense of proportionality. We also, after considering some of the questions that we've received from the committee, have put together a forecast of operational budget targets. When we get to that slide near the end of the presentation, I'll emphasize to you that the numbers we're using are the operational increases, not assessment increases. They're distinctly different because the assessments are different for each town, whereas the operational increase is the totality of the whole budget. And most importantly, we want to use tonight to gather questions from this committee that you would like us to come back to the table with answers on January 29th. Your feedback is going to be critically important to helping us plan and bring back the specific things you're looking for. So the first part of the budget we're going to go through are the school-based requests, and we're going to look at school staffing and non-salary requests. To do that, I want to just do a quick definition of these three terms. A Unit A employee is an educator in our school system that requires a DESE license. So we can think of them most commonly as teachers, but this is also true for deans, for guidance counselors, and other instructional personnel. Unit C employees are administrative assistants, instructional assistants, food service staff, custodial staff, extended learning staff, and our non-represented positions are district-wide administrators, school administrators like principals and assistant principals, directors, and there are a couple of administrative support staff positions that are non-represented positions. Those positions exist in our central office in the student services department, as well as the superintendent's office with Ms. Masterson. So just wanted to find those before we begin. And so let's begin with Mary Rowlandson Elementary. This is a chart here that is showing the forecasted enrollment for Mary Rowlandson next year. I have applied a literal interpretation of our class size standards to define the need that we need in each grade level. If you will recall, last year for Mary Rowlandson Elementary, we initially started with 4 kindergartens. We executed a budget of 3 kindergartens, leaving 1 position in abeyance. That position this year has been, we hired an educator to work with the 4th and 5th grade teachers and students, as their class size numbers did exceed that 72 standard, classroom size of 24. So that position has been placed next year at the 4th grade, thus leaving for us the need to add a kindergarten as well as a 5th grade teacher to Mary Rowlandson Elementary according to our class size standards. And oh, please forgive me. I was looking at another screen and didn't realize I turned my camera off. Camera's back on. Thank you very much. So when we look at our 5th grade in particular at Mary Rowlandson, you'll notice as section 5, these are students that are in classrooms that are intensive needs classrooms, and they do not enter the other classroom environments without the full support of staff in their program. Thus, we wanted to display that so we have an understanding of what that impact is on the total grade level class number. And then you'll see the enrollment adjustment is based on our 5-year rolling average. This is the last year where we will have the COVID blip that's included in there for folks that returned after being unenrolled during the time of COVID. So these numbers may have some adjustment to them. But you can see, based on the literal interpretation of those standards, we would need to add 2 teachers to those grade levels. So it would be adding a kindergarten teacher and assistant, a 5th grade teacher. We also would add 0.2 music teacher staffing. However, this is not a new request. This is memorializing the model that we moved to this year with our music program, where the 0.6 music teacher that historically was assigned to Center School is now shared between Center School, Florence Sawyer School, and Mary Rowlandson. So it just memorializes what we had done earlier this year. The other request that did come from Mary Rowlandson is to add a halftime office assistant. This puts Mary Rowlandson on par with the office assistants that are currently at Center School, as those 2 schools are now parallel in their student enrollment. So the net increases would be 2.2 adjustment for Unit A and a 1.5 increase for Unit C. Included here is a organizational flow chart of the school. I'll explain it here for Mary Rowlandson, and in the knowing that the same methodology applies in the flow charts coming up. You'll see in the top left box the non-rep FTE, non-represented or principals and assistant principals. Special education will be shown in the special education section of this presentation tonight. So we're going to need 24 home teachers, 6.4 related arts, 1.2 coaches, 1.2 ELL teachers, 2 guidance counselors, 2 specialists, and then we would be staffed with 4 kindergarten instructional assistants, as well as we would bring the administrative assistant allotment parallel to Central School, congruent with them at 1.5 FTE. And Mr. Mulcairn will take over the non-salary elements.
Thank you, Superintendent Downing. So just a bit here, you can see the salary pieces relative to the Mary Rowlandson Elementary School budget. I do want to call out 2 things. Obviously, you can see within the teacher salaries, the adjustments for those increased positions. Within extracurricular advisors, there is the increase, not necessarily because of changes in extracurricular programming. You'll recall last year during the budget process, we enacted a extracurricular fee for those that were not service or curriculum-bound extracurricular activities. What we're actually seeing when things shake out is not a significant return or revenue from those activities. So the offset is not built into these numbers for extracurricular at MRE and across all of our buildings. So you'll notice that in the proposed budget this evening. The other thing that I want to point out to you is that you'll see essentially minimal increases across all of the non-salaries with some small exceptions of some needs. There are some decreases as things may have been purchased last year. Those don't carry forward into this year's budget. So with that all being said, we are going to pause at the end of MRE and at the end of each of our buildings to take any questions.
All right, Scott, start us off.
I just, maybe I missed it, but what is a related arts teacher?
The related arts teachers you can think of as art, PE, music, library, as well as the instructional technology.
And is there any opportunity to share any of those resources across schools?
Those teachers right now are fully utilized at the locations that they are currently staffed at the elementary level. Mr. Powell, you asked a good question because this is an area we're examining at our middle school level.
Thank you.
Any other questions about Mary Rowlandson? I just have a quick question for you, Kurt. Just clarify for me because I know that this
Yes.
chart that you're let's see here, slide 12 is the one that I'm looking at. And this sort of a thing is going to reappear for all the schools. The green boxes mean that enrollment is necessitating the addition of a section or a teacher.
Correct.
So the kindergarten numbers that you have projected here, have you finished kindergarten registration yet? Or is this
Madam
just an
Chair,
estimate?
I knew you would ask that question. I'm very grateful to you for asking it. So thank you. So we always budget 4 kindergarten sections for our elementary schools at the beginning of the budget process. Last year at the end of the process, we executed 4 at Center, 4 at Florence Sawyer, and 3 at Mary Rowlandson, holding that other position in abeyance because they were right at the 24 mark in 4th and 5th grade. So we are currently in the kindergarten registration process. And so all we have right now are the early census numbers. The census numbers cannot be relied upon that are provided from our towns. That's not the fault of our town's collections offices that gather that assessment information. People need to return their census cards for them to get accurate accounting of who's in the town. So our administrative assistants at all 3 towns are currently working on sort of their kindergarten roundup. And with each meeting, we'll have a better sense of where we are. So by the time that we get to the joint presentation to the 3 towns, our joint meeting, we should have a much stronger sense of what we would need at kindergarten.
Okay, and so the green box that's under the 5th grade, that's because that is because the current 5th grade only has 3 sections because they're just a smaller class. And
That
that's
is
why
correct.
we're seeing that green box pop up because the current 4th grade class is going to need an additional educator.
Correct. That is correct. If our enrollment projections realize the way we anticipate they do, yes.
Okay.
But even so, even if these enrollment projections didn't realize, and let's just assume a 0 here, the total enrollment for our 5th grade there would be 73 students, which would still, by literal interpretation of our class size standards, trigger a 4th section.
Right. And if there's a red box, which we will see later, that means that the class is smaller and therefore you're eliminating a section based on the class standards.
Correct. And we'll talk about that, I think, in the upcoming Florence Sawyer slide.
Okay, so I saw Amy Cohen's hand next and then Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the red numbers, the enrollment adjustment from the 5-year average. That's the projected additions based on historical data to current enrollment. Is that what that is, or?
Yeah, that number is included there because looking at our 5-year rolling average is the best predictive that we have at the moment to understanding if students will be coming to that grade level. And that's based off of the school attending report data that I go over with the committee every year at school choice time. And so, yes, it's taken straight from that table, Ms. Cohen.
Okay. And then the other thing I noticed in looking through these slide decks, because something I was trying to do was just compare total enrollment at each school, is that I think the total enrollment numbers got cut off from some of these slides, like this one. So, and if that could, I'm sure it appears somewhere else, but for my brain, if that could be added back on, it would just help me kind of compare apples to apples.
Easily done, Ms. Cohen. Easily done. We've looked at these slides so many times. It's helpful to have other eyes look at them and be able to notice those things. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So it's possible that
Amy's question may have answered this question, but it looks like, I think that what you said is that the kindergarten this year, there are 3 sections of kindergarten at Mary Rowlandson. Is that correct? And
Correct.
but next year, those 3 sections will be divided into 4.
No, though next year we will just have a brand new batch of kindergartners. So we anticipate that we would have up to 4 classroom need for the new students that would be coming.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what this chart says. I think that in first grade, section 1, 15 students, section 2, 15 students, section 3, 16, and section 4, 16. So is that the size of this year's grouping, or is that the size of next year's grouping?
Currently, we have 4 first grade teachers in this school year. When our current kindergarten class rolls up to first grade, you can see they're rolling also up with 5 students in the enrollment projection.
Okay.
So that's what carries them into the need, because when you have an enrollment that is 67 or higher in grades K1 or 2, it warrants 4 sections. For Mary Rowlandson in this case, 67 is the number, so it would trigger a 4th section, which is already staffed in the current budget.
Thank you.
All right. Scott has a hand up.
Just to follow up on that theme, if we get less than 5 additions, like we only get 3, or if some of those students qualify for section 5, might there only be a need for 3 sections in first grade next year?
Absolutely, Mr. Powell. That's exactly right. So as I said at the beginning of this, and I'm glad we're disaggregating this conversation on the first slide, this is a strict literal interpretation of the class-side standards approach. So we are going to be studying those things over the next, the course of the next 2 months, so that as we get closer to the date, and I really want to get to a place of having a firm place for the joint budget presentation, followed up the very next evening with the school committee.
Amy Cohen.
Yeah, just one more question. Are those triggers that I'm sure you have memorized, like that 67 that triggers the 4th section in grades pre-K through 2, and then whatever the number is for the rest of the grades? Is that written down somewhere on these slides?
That's not written in these slides. That just goes back to our annual enrollment presentation, similar to the presentation I gave earlier this year that you also get during school choice time.
I think it might be helpful to put it in this presentation, because it's not a number that's on our forefront of our minds, but it's like critical to how these staffing choices are being made. And I think it would help other people understand that.
I'd be happy to add that.
You know what, though? I think it is tucked into the slide that Rowan shared on equality and equity.
It is. The class standards are mentioned there.
Yeah, I noticed that as Rowan was talking, so it's there.
Yeah, but it's talked about like 22 students per classroom, not, which I guess is the same way as saying, you know, over 67 triggers a 4th section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, just like in say 3rd grade, 97 would trigger a 5th section. So yes, that's where it is. 22 and 24 are the standards.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, so that's kind of the methodology. And I think now Kirk is maybe going to speed up a little bit, but we will continue to stop at the end of each school. We want to just be really wise with our time, because this is a long presentation. Scott, one more question?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm even more confused now, because now that I see that 22 is the limit for first grade, I'm not sure why we already have 4 sections there.
Because this year, first grade is 75 or 77 students. So we have 4 first grade teachers this year. Those same 4 first grade teachers will be needed next year. So it's not an
And-
increase in the grade level.
No, I'm misinterpreting something. I get it now. It's those 5 students. If you add those 5 to the sections above, then you exceed the 22. So that's
Yes.
That's exactly right, Mr. Powell. Yes.
all right. Thank you.
Right, so this is all estimates, but it's based upon the science of our rolling averages. All right, so
Right.
let's keep it going, Kirk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You can see in the Luther Burbank Middle School enrollment, this is an easy one to explain. No changes. What I do want to point your eye to is that in our programming, we do have 5 sections in the 8th grade because our 5th core academic subject in the 8th grade is Spanish as our world language focus. So no staff and no adjustments came from the Luther Burbank Middle School. But we still wanted to express the staffing in the middle school. Next slide, please. In terms of the flow chart so that you're able to see the flow chart. And I'll bring it to Mr. Mulcairn to go over non-salary.
Great. Thank you again. So within the Burbank budget, we see the impact of that level staffing as you don't see those changes with our teachers or any other staffing. The extracurricular scenario applies here as well with regards to no offset being applied. I do want to call out an important piece of the Burbank non-salary budget, which is in the music supplies. So currently they have a couple of large drums, timpani, kettle drum needs at the building. They have one of those instruments that's over 40 years old. Then they also have to borrow one from the high school when it's needed. So they're looking to add 2 new drums to their music department. This is not the type of instrument that students rent, your saxophones, your violins. This is a standard piece within their band and orchestra, and we know how strong our music programs are. So they're looking to have some stability of equipment within their percussion section for their band. So that's the really only non-salary request that's beyond the per pupil allotment for Burbank.
All right, thank you. Any questions on Luther Burbank? All right, seeing none, let's keep going.
Great. So to Florence Sawyer School, and this will come back to the questions that some of our committee members asked earlier. So you can see here there is a red box along with 2 other green boxes. This is an example of where currently we have 3 first grade sections at Florence Sawyer School that'll be rising to 2nd grade, and the enrollment adjustment does not warrant another teacher. So that means the 2nd grade will reduce by a position. However, 1st grade will need to add a position because they need 4 teachers for next year. And you can see that essentially is a trade of a 2nd grade teacher for a 1st grade teacher there. So it is budget neutral. What is not budget neutral is that currently in our 5th grade, we are staffed with 3 sections of 24. They will be moving on to 6th grade next year where they enter into a model that requires 4 sections. So we need to add a 5th grade section at Florence Sawyer School to receive the 96 students that are currently enrolled at Florence Sawyer. So next page, you can see those elements are explained here, along with the .2 music teacher that I explained previously. And also currently Florence Sawyer School is staffed at 1.8 administrative assistants. Those 2 administrative assistants each share that allotment with a 0.9, and there are some gaps in the summer where we don't have an administrative assistant. And so I'm bringing forward a 0.2 administrative assistant to round that out. So the total for Florence Sawyer personnel changes is 1.2 increase in Unit A and a 0.2 increase in Unit C. Here's how those numbers are fleshed out in the organizational flow chart, same as the others. And Mr. Mulcairn will address the non-salary.
Thank you. So within the Sawyer budget, we can see the updates to personnel. Again, the same phenomenon for the extracurricular advisors. And I also want to point out that we see a decrease within our contracted services. The school had a significant amount of music repair needs last year, or excuse me, within this school year, that are part of the FY25 budget. So sort of back to normal within that contracted services need going into FY26. One piece I want to note that I didn't note on the previous two schools, paper and copy machine consumables. I had my staff do a pretty considerable study and analysis of what our usage was with regards to our budgets for paper. So you'll see different amounts increasing throughout the schools. But what it really does is it levels out some of where we're at. 3 years ago, really sort of coming out of the pandemic, paper costs skyrocketed. And we've worked to certainly reduce usage within our buildings. But sort of now we're able to level set and do some analysis and make sure that going to FY26, we're in good shape school to school.
All right, let's have questions for Florence Sawyer. Go ahead, Amy Cohen.
There seems to be, I know you mentioned that the extracurricular advisor don't include the offsets. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because it seems like on each one of these slides, the dollar change, is in the 10%. The change from last year to this year is significant, but I thought that we enacted a policy that we're charging fees to students. And so I know you said the offsets aren't included. So is that going to show up somewhere else later on? Or like what's going on? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, no, I can expand further. So I'll just do a quick short historical piece last year. When we looked last year going into FY25 at the levers and things that we needed to update in order to get our budget to a place where we felt it was where the towns needed it to be, we did a significant amount of work. One of the proposals was the extracurricular fee being enacted for any activity, extracurricular activity that was not related to content or was not related to a service organization. So National Honor Society wouldn't be something that we would charge for. Or the green team would not be something that we would charge for. So these are the types of things that we adjusted last year going into FY25. What we're seeing for actual revenue in those offsets is minimal because we have students who have needs where we waive the fee and or we don't have a significant amount of activities that are actually running that would fall under the category of not service or not curricular related. And in addition to that, our principals have made adjustments for this year's what they're actually running. So when we build the FY26 budget, we build it off of the actual extracurriculars that are running within the buildings. And so there's some variability there. So if one building does not have as many activities running, their budget would be lower for FY26 because we're basing it off of the FY25 actual activities that are happening. The offset piece is not being included because we don't feel like we're actually generating revenue to make any significant offset at this point. We can certainly discuss it further on in the budget process, but it would not be on my end advisable to put an offset into the budget at this point for FY26 if we didn't feel like it was materializing in FY25.
Okay, so then are the increases in these advisor line items due to just like the built-in increases in stipends or additional activities?
Mostly they're due to, well, it's a combination of factors, Mrs. Cohen. So what I would say is there is part of it is whether they've decreased the amount of activities that they're running this year, which would change the FY26 projection. It is part of the stipend change, which is part of the contract, and it's also part of the fact that we're not adding in an offset. So I don't mean to be complicated, but it is multi-layer and it is the same across all schools. So thank you for asking for clarification.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands on Florence Sawyer. So let's keep going. Center School. Kirk, are you ready?
Hold on one moment. Sorry. I
You're
was just
fine.
going to note there. Yeah, moving into center school now, you can see we would again use that baseline kindergarten number of 80. But as the enrollment rises through grades, we see that our second grade cohort, in a literal interpretation of our class size standards, they have 4 sections with 72 students. Here, they would have 3 sections for 72 students because the class size standard changes second grade to third grade. It's 22 in second grade, it's 24 in third grade. And this is a literal expression of that. And I want to be clear about that because as we make difficult decisions in the coming weeks about where we put actual positions, there's multiple factors that we would have to consider. Looking at 4th and 5th grade, currently those 2 grades are staffed at 3 teachers in each grade. So to execute the current enrollment, we would need to add a position at both 4th and 5th grade. You will see 5th grade has 73 students. So this slide actually shows that literal interpretation well, because 5th grade is simply 1 more student more than 3rd grade in this model and would warrant another teacher. But again, we would make educated decisions based upon complexity and need of the students ultimately when we reach the final budget scenario. I'm simply providing for the committee tonight the literal interpretation of the class sizes. So next, you can see the description I just gave, along with the reduction in 0.4 music, the 0.2 that was moved to Florence Sawyer School, and the 0.2 that was moved to Mary Rowlandson Elementary. So the net increase for center school would be 0.6 FTE with no increase in Unit C. Here is that staffing request expressed through a flow chart. And I will once again turn it back to Mr. Mulcairn.
Thank you. So you can see the materialization of the salary increase at center within this budget, as well as the extracurricular piece we talked about before. I would also point out that the center school in particular has no significant requests above their per pupil allotment. So you can see how those things are coming in when we're just using the per pupil expenditure.
All right, so let's, if anybody has any questions about center school. I would just say that really quickly, 3rd grade classrooms at 24, I know that it's the standard and we might need to make hard decisions going forward, but there is concern about having so many youngsters in those rooms. So although I support the standards and I know that we need to stick by them and I'm glad we have them, it strikes me as tough to have 24 kids in a 3rd grade classroom. Just putting it on the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if you'll recall back to last year's budget process, we had a conversation similar to that relative to the class size standards at Mary Rowlandson Elementary, which is why ultimately we had a position assigned to Mary Rowlandson that was held in abeyance until the time came where we saw the appropriate place. So I say that to recognize this isn't our first time we've had this conversation and that we have some methods of how to look at that down the road.
The last thing that I want to point out really quickly is that I know that center is going to experience, if this goes forward, a small increase in their salaried positions. But I really want to point out to anybody watching that in all of these line items where you see the teacher salaries, the vast majority of this budget is personnel, it's the people. And so the percentage increase at center school is 4%. And that's largely just because of the cost of living increase that the teachers are given each year. And so a very base increase in our budget seems to be around 4%. And so when we get to the tail end of this and we start looking at how much more do the towns need to provide to keep a leveled service, that strikes me as an important number. Ross?
it may be a good time to point out that, if someone's looking at the teacher's contract for Unit A, where it would say 3.5%, we have to remember that some of our staff, unless they're at the top of the salary schedule, are subject not just to that percentage increase, but also to a potential step change on the salary schedule, as well as if they're earning other credits, they could also move a credit lane. So when we do our analysis for salary, we are by the person, looking at what step they're on, do they move up a step, and applying the increase per the contract. So not every salary category is exactly that 3.5, because there's other factors at play.
Yeah, and so this is kind of what I consider non-discretionary spending, where, it's required by the contract. It's not something that we are granting because we want to be nice, although we do want to honor all of our educators and staff members and all their hard work. But this is an increase that is just mandated by agreements that we're bound by. So I just want to put that on the table, and that's, something that all the taxpayers need to keep in mind. All right, so let's keep going.
Okay, next I would like to bring in Hale Middle School. You can see similarly the enrollment numbers that are here. I would like to point out once again, like we did at the Luther Burbank, we have a class of currently 65 students rolling into 8th grade. The enrollment projection is to reduce one by the 5-year rolling average. And with that 5th section of core academics in the form of Spanish at 8th grade, you would see that would delineate out to 13 students per classroom at the 8th grade level. So I want to pause there for a minute, because I know we've talked about this conversation in the past about our class sizes in 8th grade relative to other places, and afford the committee any opportunities to ask a question here.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I think it's just more of a comment. I know that we have our enrollment max, but I also think about the minimum level of students in a cohort, and how that kind of plays out, knowing that someone in my own family had a very small cohort in 8th grade, and I do think it's worth exploring and talking about further, because there's something to be said for the right amount of students, and 13 feels very low.
I would agree. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I would agree too, especially, I mean, I hadn't considered that perspective. I was thinking of it more from, allocation of resource point of view. And if you're, if you're have an 8th grader at a different school and their class size is more, it seems I'm trying to think of the right word. It doesn't seem fair that an 8th grader in one school would have a significantly bigger class size. Seems like there's an opportunity to consolidate those sections at Hale.
Yeah, I would say that to my earlier comment, I struggle mightily with thinking about a 3rd grade classroom with 24 kids in it and an 8th grade classroom with 13. I mean, that's an equity problem for me. All grades have different challenges. So yeah, the cultural piece is important too. I think 13 is too small. I've taught classes of 13, and it's very hard actually sometimes to build culture, but a class of 13 is just not a great allocation of resource, especially when we're looking down at our 3rd grade classes. I would also say that it's not just Hale. Hale's the smallest, but the other two 8th grades at the other 2 towns are also smaller than they should be, in my opinion. So, we need a solution there. I know that it's hard because we have technically 5 core classes at the 8th grade. And so that's kind of a scheduling conversation that needs to happen, I guess. Not for tonight. Go ahead, Scott.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding, is the 8th existence of Spanish in the 8th grade demand that we have 5 sections? We can't do it with 4 sections for that reason. Can you help explain the mechanics of that, please?
Yeah, it is built into the mechanics, and some of it, Mr. Powell, I could go into a long presentation about this, frankly, but as a product of our middle schools have historically been 250 students, which are small middle schools. And there was a educational value decision made years ago of having our 8th grade students in a everyday, approximately 45-minute period of having Spanish. And so it was incorporated into that schedule of having that standalone section so that students would be distributed across 5 homerooms that rotate 5 times during the day across those 5 teachers. We are, excuse me, just a dry throat. We are currently examining that methodology because we recognize the contradiction in our values regarding staffing of our classrooms for both equity and equality. And so we are currently working on that issue and look to bring forward how we can approach a future solution to this committee. But I want to stop there because we have some further vetting to do on that question.
All right, thanks, Kirk. I think we're ready to move on to the next.
Thank you. So you're actually going to see in Hale a reduction, and this is a product of looking at our related arts schedule and maximizing those schedules. When we had an art teacher and a health teacher elect to go to different school systems this past year, it gave us the opportunity to share a health teacher with Florence Sawyer School and to reduce the number of art sections needed that rounded out a full schedule. If you recall from our presentation earlier this year on the scheduling our related arts, we did go to a 4-day rotation with a plus day. And so a 0.4 art teacher is what is needed to execute that model. So this reflects those unfilled percentages for this year as we hired the job share for a health teacher between Hale and Florence Sawyer. We were able to make those reductions. And so that total was a reduction of 1 unit A staff. And here is Hale Middle School expressed in the flow chart as well. And I'll turn it to Mr. Mulcairn once again for non-salary.
Thank you. So to just point out quickly, again, you can see the stability of the salary pieces at Hale. I do want to point out to Ms. Cohen's point earlier about the extracurriculars. So this is a phenomenon where we had a reduction in curriculars offered this year because of enrollment or activities were combined or the like. So you'll actually see the reduction. So even with the offset not applied, there's a reduction here just because the sheer number is gone down. No other major asks for Hale throughout their request. Some increases on the contracted services just for inspection of equipment. And then also we have some 504 compliance needs and some other expenses that I think was in the form of a table. Or excuse me, it's for Lego kits for competition as well as some other pieces for those the competitions that some of our students are in. Any questions on the Hale budget?
I'm not seeing any, so let's keep going.
Okay, this brings us to Nashoba Regional High School. This is a new look that I'm giving to you this year. You can see the overall enrollment of Nashoba Regional High School. I'll point to the 9th grade that currently we have 258 students. And these are, I want to emphasize the committee based on our October 1 numbers, 258 students. Our 5-year rolling average for the number of students that leave us in 8th grade to go to a vocational technical high school or charter in 9th grade is a drop of 46 students, is our 5-year rolling average. If we apply that to the current enrollment, that would bring us to 212 freshmen. What I will note is that you would see the NRHS projected enrollment total would be 807 students. Currently, we are 802. So that is level, just slightly greater than what it is. And that's because we are graduating fewer students than the number of freshmen that would be entering the building as a general rule, with some adjustments at 10th, 11th, and 12th grade as well, based on historical numbers. The second element that was here is the simplest way that Dr. Boynton and I could construct an understanding class size standards. And so it's broken apart in semesters based upon how students select their courses. And then it's divided by the number of total sections. In other words, FTE staffing of those important teachers at the high school. A full-time teacher teaches 5 courses, with our department heads teaching 4 courses or even 3 courses, depending on other workload responsibilities that they have as outlined in the contract. So you can see those average class size standards, and it's tough to express the true story of class sizes in our high school, because at a high school, you want to have a breadth of course offerings for students that range from seminar style instruction to larger groups like bands and PE classes. So you might have some guitar ensembles. All of our foods courses have to be capped at 16 students because of the equipment that's in the classroom. And so there's lots of variables that are applied when looking at this. So I just wanted to provide this table to the committee to give you an understanding of sort of the relative class size standard in each one of our departments.
Maybe a question or two now, Kirk?
If we could just finish the high school section, then we'll come back.
Very good.
If you don't mind. So in looking at our class size standards, we are bringing forward a reduction in science of 1 teacher. And this is not going to be a reduction of an employee's position. Rather, it is as we have faculty members across the system make decisions about their future. We're aware of an adjustment to make. And that is the only net reduction that we would have at the high school. So again, here's a reduction with no additions. Here is how that is broken out across our departments. And I will turn it over to Mr. Mulcairn for non-salary.
Great, thank you. So you'll see the salary staffing here at the top. Again, we do have a change in 1 position at the high school, but the relative rest of it stays the same. You'll see under NRHS other salaries, a reduction. That was a position in the library, the instructional assistant in the library. We still have a full-time librarian, but this year that position was not filled. We signaled to the school committee earlier as school started, as that portion was used to expand our world language FTE that was necessary. So that's why it shows as a reduction, even though we've already sort of reassigned that funding within the world languages department. I do want to give a shout out to our department heads who, like I said before, met with Dr. Boynton and I and worked really hard to walk through their budgets, ask questions. I think they were all very fiscally responsible. The only real increase that we see across the departmental non-salary expenses is relative to the AP chemistry books that are necessary. So without upgrading those textbooks, we would not be necessarily following the curriculum as prescribed by AP. And we want our students to be fully prepared for the exam, as well as earning those AP credits as it may work out for them within our high school.
All right, guys, what questions do you have for the high school? Scott?
So you gave me data, so I have to ask about the data. On slide 32, your enrollment by section table. Every enrolled number for every category goes down in semester 2, except for PEH. What's the narrative that's causing that to happen?
Mr. Powell, I can't answer that question well for you. So I will go back to Dr. Boynton and bring that answer forward.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Kirk. I noticed that you are reducing science by 1 FTE, but it seems like with the exception of math, science is one of the heavier enrolled disciplines, and it looks like you're then going to make the science department
Actually, science is below 18, where you see, so as we look at science, social studies, English, mathematics, it is the lowest of those 4 elements.
Okay. So you're basing it on the ratio. You think you can reduce science by 5 sections because the one FTE is teaches 5 sections.
Correct.
But science is one of those disciplines that has equipment and things like that. And knowing that a lot of the master schedule requires some of the classes to be bigger and some of them then become smaller. I mean, could we see a science class of 28 kids, 30 kids?
No, we should not. And so we've already working with Dr. Boynton and our science department head, Ms. Peer. This is something that we've been preparing for and anticipating as we've looked at our enrollment numbers that have decreased in years previous.
Okay. Amy Cohen.
Yeah, 2 things. One is that, is there a reason why the number of enrolled students in the English classes doesn't match the enrollment at the high school, like the way it does in math and science? Those numbers are much closer.
In terms of, and forgive me, I think I need to put my glasses back on, Miss Cohen. So yeah, it all has to do with how students build their courses over the course of 4 years. English is a 4-year requirement, science is a 3-year requirement, but students do continue to elect to take some classes as electives as well. So it's not always going to match up because a student doesn't always have an English class every semester if they doubled up because they chose to take an elective, for instance. And so that has to do with some course selection by student.
Okay, and then my second question has to do with, if the students per section in a lot of these classes is less than your target of 24 students per class, and I'm assuming that's the same, it applies at the high school the way it does at the younger grades. Does that mean we have an opportunity to increase our school choice numbers?
That's a fine question, Ms. Cohen. We certainly could. We know that based upon recent enrollment, when I first began at Nashoba, our high school was at, I believe, around 850 students. I may be wrong with that number. And that we know at its peak, it was over 1,000 students. But of course, that's when the modulars were brought in back in 2013, 2014 times. So yes, we could look at that. And so I'll take that under advisement and consideration. I'll discuss it with my team.
Kirk, where I'm looking at the available school choice seats, is this over and above the school choice students who have already come into Nashoba?
Well, Madam Chair, I think that what you're saying on that line might be an error on the superintendent's behalf for this presentation because I screen grabbed one line too low. based upon the model we use for our school choice hearings. But yes, we've been systematically adding essentially 4 per grade level if those are utilized. So the max we would add at the high school if we added students would be 16, according to the methodology we've used the last 2 years.
Got it. And then my last question is the number of students who we have historically lost to other options in the 9th grade. When do you find out, or when do kids have to declare where you'll know that the number is 46 or somewhere near there?
Yeah, unfortunately, we tend to get the actual numbers on that after the budget process. But if our vocational technical schools have to give their towns the same notifications that we do. So we do get some forecasts of that in late February. So as we see that, if there's room to adjust that, we'll adjust it.
Okay, thank you. All right, not seeing any more hands, so we can keep going.
Okay, so let's come in here. I want to bring these pieces up. These are personnel changes, requests that are being made from our cabinet officials. I am not going to go into these positions at this time. Rather, as each one of our departments presents their sector of the school budget, they will be speaking to these elements. But out of student services, you would see the need for a speech language pathologist as well as an instructional student. And facilities, we want to talk about a building operator position. In teaching and learning, we're exploring the concept of academic tutors at the elementary level that would be non-represented academic tutors. And then in nursing, non-represented float nurse to provide some of those needs. And I'll leave those professionals to address those in their presentations, but I include them now to show on the next slide that the salary increases that are included in this budget. And again, I'm going to come back. I'm going to be a broken drum on this one. We included all the asks in order for you to see what the need is. And so when you put the aggregate together of the asks with the reductions, this budget would reflect at 3.8 Unit A positions, 2.8 Unit C, and 2.0 non-rep with, you can see, and the academic tutors outlined here. So that is included in today's budget. We recognize the budget scenarios that we're in today, and we're going to have to make choices. But I just wanted to make sure our committee knew what was brought forward during the request cycle. And so with that, we'll move on to department budgets, unless, Madam Chair, the committee has any further questions about these school-based budgets. Your microphone, Leah.
Thank you. Sorry. Amy Cohen.
Yeah, could you just give a little bit more explanation on the academic tutors that are being proposed and whether those are like during school hours or those after school hours, and
These will be presented in the department budgets. So I'll give Ms. Friend an opportunity to talk to that when she gets to her section.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, let's roll forward.
All right, and at this point, I am going to turn it back to Mr. Mulcairn to steer us through the departments.
Great, thank you. So you'll get to hear from me for a little while here. Our insurance and benefits budget is certainly being impacted by some increases. I want to remind the committee that last year we did, through the Insurance Advisory Committee, make a plan change as we added a deductible, which resulted in us being able to decrease our premium from FY24 to FY25. That was very helpful. In the meantime, obviously across all of healthcare, costs go up. We are using a 12% placeholder on our active employee insurance. I do not have a rate range from our Maya representative. Just as a reminder, we are in the Massachusetts Interlocal Association for insurance. So we are part of hundreds of school districts and municipalities that take part in that, which does help mitigate our costs. However, we are building in tonight a 12% assumption. I will have a specific rate range for the trust at the very end of January, likely right before our next school committee meeting. However, our actual rate will probably not be provided to us until that first week in February. So probably the first February budget update on the 12th will include a very specific number. Also built into our insurance increase for our active employees is a placeholder for the requested positions that you're hearing about this evening. Another thing that I want to point out is that we have had a significant increase on our insurance rates for our retirees, over 20%. However, what you see in the budget is higher than that because we've had a significant amount of new retirees. So those are people who are on our plans that are similar to our active employee plans because they're not available for the Medicare plans yet because of their age. So if someone retires earlier, they're on the Blue Cross Blue Shield's plans longer. So that's driving up some of our costs as well. Other operational insurance pieces, we've used approximately a 5 to 12% assumption. We just got our Worcester County retirement assessment today. So I've entered that in the updated materials for this evening. We'll continue to update our insurance pieces throughout. And again, I would say we probably don't have our final picture on insurance until that first February meeting, where we can say this is more likely what we're looking at for increases across all sectors of our insurance. Another piece on operational insurance, we don't get our final numbers until really after the budget season. I will reach out again to our operational. So that's more of our unemployment insurance. That's more of our, our auto insurance. That is our casualty, our property, all those types of things. But they are behind our health and dental rates, unfortunately. So luckily we don't make a lot of claims there. But again, certainly it's something to consider, and we'll continue to get updates as they get closer as representatives to those dates. They'll get more information from the companies and they'll share it back with us. So you can see those increases here. I'm not going to go ahead and read across them. We have seen just lower dental usage. And again, I will let you know that for our active employee pieces, we are using our numbers as of last week. I still need to get an update on some retirees. Their plans go January to January. So we may not have as many, or we may have more retirees on plans. But I'll get more updates on those, like I said. Again, this is a major portion of our budget, so I'm happy to take questions and walk through anything as necessary.
Go ahead, Scott.
So I understand we would have to get union approval to do something like this, but have we made any inquiries about what kind of insurance savings we might be able to achieve if we increase the deductible again? And, like we did last year, if we increase the deductible and then pay the extra, might there be savings there or something like that?
I don't know. I would have to ask that question of our representative to see if that's even an option. It may, because we already took on a deductible, an increase may not be a lever that's going to move anything. And Mr. Powell, you were and appreciative of your attendance on the advisory committee for insurance last year. As we recall, some of those pieces on copays or prescription changes, some of those plans really did not move the needle on our insurance really at all. When you look at it, the deductible was the best possible thing we could have done at the moment. I will certainly pursue it as a question. I can't say that it will yield the same result, even if we were to put the advisory committee back together.
Understood.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands, so we can keep moving.
Thank you. Just want to finish my note on that. Okay, our system-wide, so this is where we have sort of all of our central office and some of our district-wide pieces. The only things that I really want to call out specifically ahead of time is that we continue with our OPEB trust contribution as recommended in November of 23 by the OPEB Management Advisory Committee. And thanks again to Mr. Powell for heading that up for the school committee and the town members that participated. So our OPEB trust contribution of $100,000 this year reflects that recommendation of increasing by $25,000 each year. Our transportation costs are based on our contractual rates. Debt service is also documented within this account, and I will show that a little bit here. So for those of you who recall our high school renovation from approximately 20 years ago, this year that we're in right now, FY25, that is the last payment on that debt service. So that debt is retired as of June 30th, 2025. The high school track and field has approximately 2 more years. FY28 is the last year for the high school track and field debt. And leach field and fuel storage, which is actually a bond anticipatory note where we pay 10% down plus interest each year on that original note for the leach field and fuel storage project that was taken on 2017-18, I believe. It may even been right before that. But again, that's a band, so we pay a principal of about 10% of the original loan every year. And so that has approximately 4 or 5 more years left on it. But I'll confirm with our treasurer. There's always the possibility where you could pay more principal in a given year on a ban. We're not recommending that right now, given our full picture. And as far as high school new construction, so one of the assumptions that you'll see in the detail pages of the budget is taking on a new and additional bond. The strategy out of the bond advisory committee when we started the project was to bond in 2 to 3 stages. This would be stage number 2. I have a follow-up conversation with our financial advisors tomorrow. If we feel like a number can change based on what we're looking to borrow, we'll do so. But we are moving to do a bond sale at the very beginning of February. So again, final details on that to come. And we'll continue to share information with our town officials as we get updates on what that may look like. We've had some conversations with them throughout the fall. So timing with them is important. As is knowing as much information ahead of time before that sale as possible. So this is the entirety of the system-wide budget. And again, some changes here. One thing I'll point out is our photocopier expenses. That's our lease. Our lease is near the end of its time, so we'll be using the state bid list. I'm approximating $60,000 to pick up a new lease. But as we work on that throughout the spring, we'll see what that looks like and update the committee as necessary. You can see the NRHS building project debt service. As many of you are aware, our operating assessment does not include this debt service. We'll talk about that a little bit. We've been working really hard and purposeful to make sure that we're showing our debt service outside of our operational costs because of the increase in the need to borrow for the high school. So it doesn't get baked into our operating assessment. We want to make sure our towns and our residents are aware of what the actual cost of operating the school district is, exclusive of debt service. Any questions on the system-wide proposed budget?
I have a question for you, Ross.
Yes, please.
I noticed that the feasibility study is zeroed out because we've paid it. Is that right?
Correct.
And have we been reimbursed for that as well?
So yeah, so that's part of the reimbursement that we've been receiving from the MSBA. I think we talked about this maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago, that we are holding our MSBA reimbursements at this point. We're not spending those as we get them in, because we want to, again, track those and work to put those in an account where it's also interest bearing. So at the end of the project, that may help where we're at. If we spend those as we go, we don't have the potential to earn interest. So it's one of those balancing acts as we get those reimbursements in.
Right, but aren't we borrowing money that's paying interest at the same time? It doesn't.
Correct. Like I said, it's a bit of a balancing act. So at the end, we still have to borrow what we need to borrow. It doesn't change. But currently we are not spending down that MSBA money just yet.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so I think we can keep going.
Great. Just a quick note on substitute teachers. I know we have many educators on the committee. We all remember sort of the difficulty and sort of day-to-day staffing crises we would have. We're far enough away from the pandemic now where we feel like we can do some good analysis. And based on where we're at with our analysis for substitute usage for both daily and long-term, we've made adjustments. Not much is needed more in the substitute line for long-term substitutes for teachers, for substitute teachers. However, it's those regular day-to-day subs where we want to make sure that we're providing adequate funding within there to make sure that we can keep up with the needs. And again, we're in a better place where we feel like our analysis now is not inclusive of the pandemic need. So we feel like it's a pretty accurate analysis of what needs to be proposed.
I'm sorry, I had one more question for you, Ross. I remembered. So the second bond that you're going to be taking out in February, it's going to be approximately annually, it's going to cost us $7 million. Do you know the number of that second bond? How much we're
So that estimate is based off an $80 million bond.
okay, and the rates have not been locked in yet. You're not sure what we're going to get, but you're assuming it's
Yeah, I'll get more sort of market analysis and sort of market updates tomorrow when I meet with our financial advisors.
okay. And any idea when the third round will be taken?
So that bond will get us through approximately one more year of cash flow needs. So, and approximately another year. So the timing to line up with budget information so that when we go before our towns in the spring, that they have an accurate understanding, I think is important.
Okay. And I just have one more question before I get to you, Amy. I see that we are laying out charter school tuition and school choice out tuitions. This is because students who opt to go to other public schools, we have to pay those public schools approximately $5,000 per student, but the charter school tuition is much higher because it might be far fewer students going to charter schools, but we actually pay an actual tuition for charter schools.
Correct. And we'll get better numbers once that governor's budget is released. That's also part of the governor's budget is our preliminary number. So that number will be updated.
Does the governor's budget, is that where we find out what the tuition is for, say, an AMSA student?
The specific number, I would have to double check on that. So I'll check. However, what we do get is our assessment numbers on what our projected charter school will be next year.
Okay. How complicated. Thanks, Ross.
And I would add in that it's January. We don't fully know how many of our students are going to be switching to a charter school next year. Correct.
Got it. Okay, Amy. Amy Cohen, did I lose you? Did you have a question?
I forgot to unmute. The $7,120,491 of the building project debt service that's showing up for the fiscal year 26. So can you just kind of help me and other community members understand, is that the number that we should be expecting to be assessed next year, and for how many years after that? I know Leah just asked a similar question, but
so so the first bond is a 30-year bond. The second bond would anticipate to be a 30-year bond. If you look in the detail pages of the system-wide expenses, that's where that's broken out. And again, the estimate on bond number 2 is really from our financial advisors. It's not a definitive number, and it will be updated. Does that answer your question?
Amy, are you asking when it's going to hit our tax bills?
No, well, I mean, I think it's important to clarify that. I know that this will hit Bolton's tax bills in July, because that's when that's when fiscal year 26 starts. I'm just trying to, there's a big jump between last year and this year. I know it has to do with the bonds that are taken out each year, but I think I'm just trying to help community members understand what's coming down the pipeline. And I'm still a little confused about that in terms of like, each year, will that number go up? Will it remain the same? That kind of thing.
Well, yes, as we continue to borrow for the high school, the debt service will increase.
I think too, Amy, that the 3 towns it's going to be different for the 3 towns. Like what Stowe needs to increase on their people is going to be different from what Bolton needs to increase on their people. I actually think that these questions might be best answered by our town managers eventually, and how that actually impacts real estate tax bills, those quarterly bills we all get. So maybe more on that later.
Madam Chair, if I may add,
Yeah.
because you hit the nail on the head. This is going to be something that is an annual adjustment for our town officials to work on, because also the repayment schedules are based upon the high school enrollment as outlined in the regional agreement. And as we know and have experienced, that shifts over time. So each year, it's not as if it's like a mortgage where you can count on sort of a consistent principal and interest payment over the course of 30 years. There are variables that are applied there, and each town has its own constructs that are involved in their assessments that will time out and new ones that will come on. So those are all variables that I think are best addressed by town officials. We assess them so they know what the borrowing is, and then they pull the town levers and mechanisms to define that, how those tax bill assessments go out to their residents.
Scott?
So I just like to ask a question I think might help a little bit flesh out what Amy's trying to get at, which is how much did we borrow in 2023? You said we're expecting to borrow 80 million next month, and then how much do we think we're going to need to borrow in the third tranche?
So the third would be approximately 50. What we want to do is balance out sort of end of project needs. So in talking with other school districts, what a lot of them have done is, so if we were going to do, we did 30, if we're doing 80 now, the last one, we might not want to go all the way to the max, because we want to leave some just to see how the project closes out. So that's sort of step 3. But correct, Mr. Powell, we're essentially borrowing in 3 major stages.
Right. So if we're going to have $7.1 million in costs based on 110 million borrowed, then we can expect that to go, assuming interest rates stay roughly the same, that will go up to somewhere in the $11 million a year neighborhood when we're done borrowing.
Yeah, I mean, I trust your mental math on that this evening, but certainly if we're ballparking, I understand your methodology.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone, let's keep going.
Were there any other questions on substitutes? I'm sorry, I don't want to overlook that.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. So I want to introduce now our Director of Health, Wellness, and Safety, Mariah Zwicker, who's going to walk through her department budget. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure before I start talking. Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the rest of the school committee for allowing me to come and speak to the health, wellness, and safety budget that is proposed for next school year. Oh, good. I didn't even have to say next slide. The health, wellness, and safety budget proposed is aligned with the strategic plan in the following ways. SO 4.6, improving and sustaining physical environments that promote healthy environment learning conditions in all buildings. The professional development of the nursing team, the ability to purchase supplies and equipment needed to care for each and every student, and having skilled per diem nurses who are oriented to our health offices promotes health and wellness to each and every student at Nashoba Regional. SO 4.5, which is review of school safety and develop priority actions as a district and for individual schools. The ALICE through the Navigate 360 modules and Massachusetts Partnership for Youth yearly costs supports SEL and public safety trainings for all of our staff, as well as for the public safety personnel in all 3 towns. And the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is also known as the YRBS, is offered every other year and will be conducted in the spring of next school year. And SO 4.3 is to recruit, hire, and retain highly qualified, diverse staff that mirrors the educational vision. The addition of a 1.0 FTE LPN, which is a licensed practicing nurse, will allow for coverage of field trips, one-to-one nursing coverage, and the support of school nurses' daily runnings of the health office and student health care case management. And the per diem nursing pool continues to cover school health offices for nurse absence, support mandating screenings, and field trips. Next slide, please. The new ask that has been mentioned in previous slides this evening is for a district support nurse in the form of a licensed practicing nurse position for the health and wellness and safety budget. This full-time LPN would support our nursing team by fulfilling many of the tasks that our school nurses need to complete, as well as expand our capacity to fulfill the one-to-one nursing needs for our medically complex students. Next slide, please. Overall, there are incremental budget increases requested for the health, wellness, and safety budget beyond the LPN request and the YRBS survey, which costs $3,000 and is conducted every other year and will be conducted next spring of 2026. Other than that, the budget increases reflect inflation and costs of supplies, equipment, and contracted services. And thank you all for your time. And if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thank you for that. Any questions on the health, wellness, and safety? All right, not seeing any, so we can keep going. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mariah. You're all familiar with Mr. Frieswick, who is the Director of Facilities. You're also aware that Mr. Frieswick is unavailable this evening. So I want to do my very best to fill his shoes, or perhaps the best term is to fill his boots this evening. So here we go. So obviously the strategic plan connection for our facilities department is relative to our physical environments, because we want to have healthy and vibrant learning conditions for all of our students in each of our learning spaces. So our maintenance costs increase, obviously go up to make sure that we are keeping up with our scheduled maintenance, ensuring that we've also analyzed our spending patterns, and then also taking a look at compliance standards. As you're aware, we do have to make sure that we meet drinking water compliance, as we've talked about that significantly over the last 12 months or so. And then also as we work to be more efficient with our energy use. So bringing in our contractors to do what we need to do as far as making sure we monitor our systems and we're being efficient, even with some very old equipment in some of our spaces. So a couple of new asks that are within Mr. Frieswick's budget, facilities building operator. So I've had to act as a substitute facilities director a couple times, including this morning at 5 a.m. And I can tell you there's no easy task. What we're really looking for, though, is not necessarily an assistant to Mr. Frieswick, but a building operator. So we have equipment that is old and we have equipment that is new. They're both complex with regards to what needs to happen and understanding how they work and to build efficiencies with them and to also become an expert in our equipment. So having someone with a background in either plumbing or HVAC knowledge can, number one, help reduce some of our repair needs, reduce some of our visits from our contractors to provide either repair or maintenance, but also having somebody on site and with their hands on our machines, our equipments, our furnaces, our boilers, will also help the longevity of that equipment. We also are in need of a vehicle. So we do have an old Chevy passenger van right now that is used for the PACE program, athletics, and some various clubs and activities. But it's at the end of its useful life. So that is also being built into the requests. And we have removed that from our process the last couple of years. But again, regardless of the outcome, we're making sure you're aware of it this evening. A couple other things that you'll see within, there's increase in scheduled maintenance for small projects. There's our scheduled preventative maintenance. We have to do a 15-year engineering study for the high school wastewater plant, which is part of our permit with DEP. This is outside the scope of the building project. And then because we have to meet DEP and other compliance, our wastewater and water testing operator contract is going up in cost as well. So here is the full scope of the facilities budget. I just want to make a quick note under facilities department salaries. What we did here is we do have the increase for the operator, but we've also had a little bit of a slight reduction because, as you remember, our program administrator for facilities is also now shared with our food services department. So it's not just the increase. We also have a little bit of a decrease. So the balance works out to the dollar change you see there. And then again, throughout here, you can see the proposed budget for next year, and it's further detailed in the backup that's provided within the budget. So at this point, I'll do my best to take any of your questions with regards to facilities.
Great job, Ross. Rob would be proud.
I sure hope so. Okay.
All right, not seeing, oh, I see one hand, Amy.
Oh.
Sorry, I seem to have a question for each category, but the program vehicle, where does that show up on this proposed budget for facilities? I don't see it as a line item.
Let me just double check within the detail. Ms. Cohen, hang on 1 second.
Amy, can you restate that? I'm sorry, I just missed it.
Sure. It says one of the new asks is for a program vehicle.
Got it.
Replacement of the passenger van. And so I was just trying to find it on the proposed budget request, and I don't see it.
Yeah, so ironically enough, Ms. Cohen, it's actually under scheduled maintenance projects because what I'm gonna guess is a previous budget item with regards to district-wide vehicles and equipment. So it's built in there. Given your question, we may think about moving that to vehicle expenses so it's more clear.
Okay.
So thank you for asking that question.
You're welcome. And then as a follow-up on that, if that program vehicle is the new ask of the facilities department, is there a limitation on what clubs can use it? Because I'm just thinking about the EMT Nashoba cadet program and how they are in need of a new car. And I just wondered if there would be an opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone if this vehicle is going to be replaced.
Yeah, so I think typically during the day it's used for the PACE program, which runs out of our high school for what their needs are. I would not tonight commit it to being able to do that. I understand your question, but I think it's probably best not assigned. I don't know if Superintendent Downing wants to speak to this at all, because we've had conversations with the town of Bolton with regards to the cadet vehicle. So I would not commit that to being used for the program today.
Yeah, the cadet vehicle is related to an MOU between the district and the town of Bolton, and I think it's best to leave it in that place.
Can I ask a quick question about the capital planning? Whenever anything is going to be bought and owned by the district, it doesn't need to go into a capital plan, right? Those are only for the town operated or town owned assets?
Yeah, so it has to fit the definitions within the regional agreement. So essentially, there's DESI function code 7000, and there's some categories within there, but the best sort of summary of that information is It has to have a useful life of more than 5 years. And it has to be more than $10,000. That then it goes as a capital request to the towns. And just like you said about the assessments, each one of our towns handles our capital requests differently.
But because the district would own that vehicle, it's not
Correct.
considered a capital
Request to
request?
the towns. No, if you look at the regional agreement, because it would be a capital asset owned by the district across the district, it is assessed as the rest of the district budget is.
Like in operational cost?
Correct. Yeah. Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, looks like we're good to go there. Let's keep going.
Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce or reintroduce our Assistant Superintendent, Laura Friend.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcairn, and great job with facilities. I'd just like to take a moment to extend gratitude on the part of teaching and learning to the school committee and to our larger school community as a result of your collective support and the hard work of our educators. We continue to make steady progress towards our strategic plan and the work of teaching and learning. I just like to take 10 seconds to just highlight some work of note as it relates to your support relative to our curriculum adoptions and work there. To date and of note, we have implemented high-quality instructional materials in K-5 math, K-5 ELA literacy, and 6-8 science. Currently, we are working on 6-12 math and 9-12 science steadily. We're also really excited about our work at the high school with the implementation of our innovation pathways planning and the work there. So thank you for supporting our work, and our intention here is to continue the steadfast work as it relates to improving our student learning experience with the help of our tremendous educators. Also of note, to help further accelerate our work since the spring of last year, we have successfully secured 5 competitive grants totaling $215,960 that have worked to help accelerate and support our work in the strategic plan during this fiscal year. Please be assured, and we want the committee to be assured, while there are no guarantees, teaching and learning will continue to be committed to seeking out and competitive grant opportunities to help further accelerate and support our work beyond and support the operating budget. And that work continues as we speak. Next slide. So on the next 3 slides, I've provided really a highlight of the teaching and learning requests, and we'll certainly answer any questions you may have on the other side. So as it relates to curriculum development and what I had just shared, our work with curriculum is always going. Curriculum work is dynamic. It's definitely not static. And there's a lot across grade levels, across content areas, K-12. However, our curriculum review schedule provides a focus for grade levels and content areas through a cyclical 5-year process. Priority areas for FY26 curriculum development are highlighted for you here and include 6-12 ELA, 6-12 world language, 9-12 STEM, and world history, 9th grade. As well, we're continuing to work on the curriculum development for enrichment and extension as part of our work with MTSS. That's our multi-tiered system of support, which we have presented to the committee in a prior meeting. And a need here is reflected for you as an identified request and need to demonstrate learning opportunities for our students who have already demonstrated understanding of learning within the classroom for a given unit, content, or skill. Moving on to textbook adoption. Our FY26 textbook line here sees a reduction from FY25. Last year, as you're well aware, we had our large K-5 ELA adoption, so we're naturally seeing a decrease here due to the elimination in large part of that request. yet. The textbook line here requests supports year 2 of our literacy implementation, specifically with a focus on foundational literacy and intervention materials, with us bringing forward Heggerty adoption into grade 1 and providing additional intervention materials to support foundational literacy in K-3. We also have here a request for high-quality instructional materials for middle school mathematics as part of our curriculum review process, as noted in our last school committee with curriculum director Candace McBrearty and department head Nate Melbourne. We've presented our update there as it relates to 6 through 8 math and our work that's beginning there at the high school through 9 through 12. Of note, we have already secured a grant to help support the purchase for our middle school mathematics. That's already been approved by the school committee and noted for you here in the amount of $28,506. In terms of requests to support professional development, we also see a decrease here in requests from FY25. Requests here support 6 of our initiatives across 3 of our strategic objectives and include professional development to support our district-wide early release, the implementation of all block, which is additional literacy and language block as part of our EL implementation in year 2, specifically for grades 3 through 5, to continue that foundational literacy work at the upper elementary grades. Work to support content and pedagogy focused PD, continuing that work as it relates to our curriculum review cycle, Tier 2 targeted support intervention strategies, science 6 through 12, math 6 through 12, world language 6 through 12, and technology innovation, as well as a request here to continue the work relative to PLC's coaching and consultancy, with the work to continue to work on the implementation of the PLC model, specifically with a focus at the high school in grades 9 through 12. Next slide. Our instructional software line here reflects the most notable increase in the teaching and learning budget. This is a result of the renewal and the necessary renewal of our Renaissance Star Learning Suite, which had previously been funded by ESSER grant funding. Renaissance Learning is our universal screening tool, which you're aware assesses students' reading and math skills at minimum 3 times a year. Not only does universal screening data provide us with important information about student need in a timely and proactive way, it also is required by law. In September 2022, I know we've spoken about this with the committee in prior meetings, but as a refresher, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed adopted a regulation that requires school districts to assess at least twice per school year each student's reading ability and progress in literacy skills from kindergarten through at least 3rd grade using a DESE-approved screener, of which STAR is a DESE-approved screener. Our Renaissance Learning Suite also notably provides strong practice tools, providing students with adaptive individual practice based on student need that is elevated from our universal screening and directly aligned to our Massachusetts Learning Standard. We would like the committee to be aware that we have already completed a very robust application for a competitive grant that would potentially, if allocated, if we were awarded the grant, would reduce and help defray the cost of this request here. The state has not indicated an award date of yet, but certainly will keep the committee apprised of that information as provided to us. Other requests within the instructional software line include software that reflects high usage, high utility, and high curriculum alignment, including multimedia tools to support content creation, instructional tools to support instruction and intervention, as well as our consortium membership to support our student data privacy efforts. Our curriculum membership and dues reflect district memberships for state and national core curriculum associations, including MATSOL for our EL department, in Ed Leader 21, which is our national organization to support our continued connections with other districts across the nation as it relates to our Portrait of a Nashoba graduate. Our contracted services line here includes a request for funding to support our ongoing district equity and inclusion work, specifically professional development, learning, and related resources to support directly our equity audit recommendations that we received in the spring of last year. So the funding there is allocated to support our ongoing equity work and commitment as a district. Relative to new asks, and I know Ms. Cohen had asked a question about this earlier. Teaching and Learning is proposing for consideration a request for 6 part-time academic tutors, 2 per elementary school, to be focused on foundational literacy and numeracy. As you are aware from our Title I grant, and a result of increased Title I funding this school year, we have implemented this part-time academic tutor model in Lancaster. This is currently underway using Title I funding. We are seeing the value in this model and these roles, and we're looking to expand the model across the district with our request next year. The academic tutor specifically would provide targeted small group and individual support for students identified at the earliest moment possible as at risk in literacy and numeracy during the school day. The goal here is to provide timely response to student need, such as through a double dose of foundations or a double dose of Hegarty or a double dose of our math using our Bridges intervention kits. The goal here is to provide short timely response through the academic tutors to catch them up, close those gaps so the students can return to the classroom quickly without delay, and those gaps can be closed again at the earliest as possible during the foundational primary years. That is essentially the ask with this request for our part-time academic tutors. And again, we have this underway in Lancaster as a result of Title I funding. Our cost changes, I believe I have spoken to the increase and the decrease here. We've spoken to the decrease in the district textbook adoption and the decrease in PD and the reason behind the increase in instructional software. So I believe that that is reflected on this slide. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mulcairn to speak to the next slide and then open up for any questions that the committee may have.
So thank you, Assistant Superintendent. There's not much more to add in here or to discuss. You can see the academic tutors under the teaching and learning tutors and assistants line. And we certainly see the decrease in ask, but also under instructional software with regards to that platform, we see the increase. But again, this friend went into great detail. So appreciative for her efforts there, and also to what she said. Thank you to the committee for the support for the teaching and learning budget over the last several years. I know that we worked hard to maintain and keep in pieces that were key to the development of our curriculum, instruction, and assessment within the district. And we're seeing the results of that. And now we're able to sort of step back and present a budget that really does not have significant asks built into it. Thank you.
Laura, I'll start by asking a little bit more about the tutors. Will the Title I grant still provide an offset for the Lancaster tutors, and this request is going to pay for the tutors that you assigned to the other 2 towns?
That's a great question. I don't know if Superintendent Downing, you want to lean in here, but I can start off with the answer of the Title I grant funding is intended to supplement, not supplant, the operating budget and what's provided in other schools at other similar grade levels. So Title I funding is on top of what's being offered through the operating budget. I don't know if Superintendent Downing, you can clarify that a little bit better.
Yeah, Madam Chair. from a very high level, Title I for many years was traditionally funded under what was the free and reduced lunch enrollment provisions. That has since shifted to what is categorized as a high needs enrollment position. And so this past year, our Title I funding increased significantly. If you harken back to when Ms. Friend presented that earlier in this year. And the reason why that did is because we crossed over a threshold to receive additional funding. Your question's an interesting one because we don't get those numbers until late July to understand if we've crossed those thresholds. I worry when you cross your threshold because that means you could just as easily cross back down into the previously funded category. Luckily, the DESE does produce a forecast that typically comes out at the end of February. So on that forecast, it's intended to notify districts that are in a bandwidth that they're watching carefully. They put those school districts on notice for any changes. So we should hear something by the conclusion of our budget process, but there is no guarantee coming from DESE on the Title I numbers.
So the 97.2 number is for the tutoring program sum total. How many tutors is it? Did you say 6?
6. Yep. 3
Got it.
hours per day. Yep.
And so if we are to get that Title I funding, this number could come down, but it's only after the money's been allocated. So we would, use that Title I.
No, you have to think about the Title I funding completely differently. So in other words, the Title I funding was used for this model and is currently being executed now. And under Title I rules, you cannot supplement or you cannot supplant, excuse me, it's to supplement. So we cannot use Title I funding to show a distribution of how we do that across the district. We would still have to show in our Lancaster schools that is where the preponderance of that need would be. So this is completely, while the current positions are supported by Title I funding, the 6 positions at the $97,000 clip is completely independent and considered outside of that scope.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's keep rolling. I just want to make note very quickly. I know we don't have a lot left. We have about 23 minutes until that magic hour of 9. So I just want to put our presenters on a little bit of notice there. So let's keep rolling into, I think, student services.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Roanne Demash, who is our new Director of Student Services. I know that she's presented her entry plan work so far, and she's going to speak to some of those pieces I know within her budget, and also discuss some of the increases that you're seeing in the special services budget.
Thank you. I am really appreciative of being here tonight to speak about the student services budget. I know that student services, especially the special education side, when we talked earlier, especially about equity, can be very complicated, and along with the state and federal IDA laws. So let's move forward. So this is, as you've seen in all the slides, special education really is identified not only by school, what we call caseload numbers, but also student need. So you'll see a variation across schools. I am constantly reviewing those caseload numbers with our team, all of our teams, our school psychologists, our team chairs. We review all the caseloads to see what students are qualifying for services, what our special education teachers at each grade level is experiencing on their caseload that they are servicing on a daily basis for instruction. They're also participating and chairing team meetings and identifying students for eligibility in special education. So it does vary across school based on student need, and but overall, we have a pretty consistent staff at our elementary level. We do see that we have on average for special education teachers. They start at the grade level preschool to grade 2, and then after grade 2, they're identified at each grade level. We also see that we have a team chair identified to support the needs across the district. MRE and Luther Burbank share a team chair. Sawyer has an identified team chair. The high school has their own, and Center and Hale share one. So it's based on numbers that are constantly reviewed. So this is the proposed budget based on the strategic plan. And I'll review this a little bit in depth because it really is based on student need. But when I reviewed this in my entry plan, one piece that we really wanted to look at is the alignment of some services, especially in the Tier 3 academic area. We want to take a closer look and really expand in these services for Tier 3, especially in the area of sensory reading instruction. We want to give the same opportunity across the district that students can access based on their identified disability plus their need for instruction. We also do see some unique needs that are just based on disability areas. We do see that we don't have currently employed staff, which is pretty common for certain types of services, such as vision services. So those are our contracted services that we have to go outside of the district to supply. And then we really are at the mercy of those contracted services and the rates that they set for themselves. So we've seen an increase in that area because of those services and needs, and based on what the market is supplying and charging right now. We have seen an increase in our bilingual evaluations. So this is a service that we have to go and contract outside of. So we have to hire a bilingual evaluator if our students have, if their first language is not English. So we've seen an increase in families requiring, or students requiring this service, especially in Portuguese and Spanish. Yeah, we've seen an increase. Yep. I just want to go back one. I'll be quick. So we've also seen an increase in testing materials. There's been a market increase, and we've also needed to update our testing to the latest version for our initials and 3-year reevals. As part of the strategic plan, we're also looking at increasing in our supports around the MTSS model, especially around social emotional learning. And this is seen in some of our contracted services, supplying some training and support to our staff, especially currently in our early rise in TLC program at the high school. Okay, now we can go forward. So based on all that, and looking at caseload numbers and the way services are able to be delivered, my asks for next year is to increase 1 FTE speech and language pathologist. Currently, right now, we have 324 students out of our 650 on active IEPs who have direct speech and language services. We've seen an increase in our preschool numbers qualifying for speech and language. And in order for us to continue to be able to meet the needs and deliver the service for speech and language, I am recommending 1 FTE in this area. I'm also recommending 1 FTE for an instructional assistant at the LEAP program at Hale. Last year, Hale made a commitment to expanding the LEAP program that is currently active at Center and services students at Center School. And now we want to have that continuum of services as students increase in their grade level and continue to need that support. So we would need an additional FTE instructional assistants to support that continuum of service. We have seen some cost changes and some pretty dramatic cost changes. We have seen an increase in our out-of-district tuitions. To date right now, as you're all aware, out-of-district and students moving in placements are IEP team decisions. And so this is always a moving target, and this also is affected by move-ins. So to date, we have 24 students in out-of-district student placements. We had originally started at 19. We did see an increase based on some team decisions and some move-ins from out-of-district of students who moved in with IEPs who already had an out-of-district placement identified through their IEP. We also have seen 4 changes in the current out-of-district roster of students who were in one placement and needed through the team process to have a more restrictive placement. So we did see an increase in change in that. And as you know, the out-of-district tuition costs are really set by OSD and continue to increase every year. And so we're really left at being obligated to pay that OSD rate when students are referred and then accepted to that program. Out-of-district transportation, we've also seen a pretty large increase in our transportation costs for special education. And so why is that? Well, currently, right now, we're in a model with Assabet Valley Collaborative. They manage our transportation contract as a collaborative with many other districts. As you know, over the summer, we had one bid winner that was going to provide in-district transportation services at a rate of $270 per route. As we all know, that did not work out for us, and we had to go out to rebid with another company. Through this process, we did bid out to another transportation provider, and their base rate is $324 a route. And I want you to keep in mind that that is just the base cost. Some of our students through the team process require monitors on the van, which is an additional cost, and a wheelchair van is a higher cost. And we have 2 wheelchair vans in district that are required right now. So this is what's really contributed to some of our increases, plus our increase in our out-of-district student population. Once a student is found eligible and requiring an out-of-district placement, it is our obligation to provide transportation to that location.
Mr. Mansh, if I may
Yes.
add in on the transportation conversation. Today, Mr. Mulcairn and I had a conversation with our executive director and their finance office. We are working very closely with them right now and looking at current efficiencies that would impact, hopefully show us a better position this year, but also for next year. But it continues to be a place that we have to examine carefully. And as I expressed this committee at a previous meeting, it is one of the topics which I discussed with Senator Kennedy as needing some support from the state level on. Mr. Mulcair and I have talked about what that changes looked like in budgets over recent years, and he's prepared a slide image that we did not add to the slide deck yet because we had released the materials to the community already, but I'm going to ask him to share that representation with you tonight to get a sense of the challenge that we've seen in the most recent years. So, Mr. Mulcairn. And we will add this slide to the slide deck to make sure it's included in the scope of the slide deck.
Is everyone seeing the special education transportation budget bill? Okay, great, thank you. So a couple of things on this, as Superintendent Downing mentioned, as Roanne mentioned, with the changing contract, not only from year to year, but because we had a change midsummer, we've seen an impact on what we're doing this year, which therefore informs next year. What I'm sharing with you here is each year we have to budget for special education transportation. I took a look at FY22 through today and looked at what did the district budget for cost for special education transportation. The blue line that you see is the total cost that was projected in the budget for transportation. That red line you see is the grant funding available to offset transportation. So what happens over time without an increase in any major increase in our IDEA grant, we're not able to leverage more of an offset through that grant to our transportation cost. So there's a compounding factor of just the general cost per van, more students being out of district. We're looking at the route efficiencies, just like Superintendent Downing said, with ABC, because we'd like to see more sharing of these routes when students are leaving the district. And then there's just the general change in cost that we did not expect because we changed contractors midsummer for our in-district transportation. So back in FY22, the total projected cost was just about near the $900,000 level. However, because of the $700,000 available in the grant, really whatever only showed up in the budget was $125,000. Over time, like I said, the cost has gone up. We're seeing a much larger cost increase for 26 projected. However, our available grant funding has not changed. Therefore, over time, we're left with a bigger share to the operating budget. Another thing that I want to point out, because we often talk about circuit breaker, where if you remember back on the end of year operating budget report that I presented in October, we had to tap into circuit breaker to support the budget expenditures for FY25 in special education. We built in 1.6 million this year for FY25. We built in 1.8 for next year. We're going to continue to look at that and see what can be done. However, in studying the district's return on circuit breaker over the last several years, I just also want to point out a phenomenon within that as well. In FY23, any qualifying costs through circuit breaker calculation for transportation were reimbursed at 75%. In FY24, the reimbursement dropped to 58% for transportation costs. For FY25 reimbursements, the transportation cost reimbursement rate dropped to 44%. So we are not seeing just a flat, static availability of IDEA funds. We're also seeing a decrease in some of the potential circuit breaker funding that we could bring in and offset. We're going to continue to look at this. We're going to continue to study what may happen with just our general routes right now. And we're going to also continue to see what might be forecasted for where circuit breaker may come in for next year and how we may update or change our projections for circuit breaker offsets. So I apologize for the late slide add in, but I thought it was a helpful visual to see one example of how cost increasing, but potential funding source not.
Thank you. And if you could go to the financial table to round out the student services portion.
So you can see the cost increases, again, for the teachers is not, that it would include the SLP, our SPED assistants and tutors, includes the IA adjustment as well. Our preschool salaries are offset by the preschool revolving tuitions. And then you can see the remaining changes, obviously, most notably, and highlighted by Mrs. DeManch, is that we have our contracted services, therapies, and evaluations, our out-of-district tuition, and our special education transportation. So at that note, Noah will pause for, I'm sure, some questions with regards to our budget.
Go ahead, Scott.
So clearly the special education transportation is a severe pain point. Have you had discussions with other districts about if they're seeing the same experience as far as the grants are concerned, as well as the reduced reimbursement rates on the circuit breaker?
Scott, I'm involved very closely with our association on that regard. Yes, this is a universal problem across districts.
Okay.
And this is why we are collaborating together as an association to lobby policymakers to do something about this problem.
Thank you.
Amy Cohen?
Yeah, could you just help us understand again, what is meant by students who are qualified for out-of-district placement? Like, what control do we have over whether they qualify for out-of-district placement?
I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Mance to talk about the IEP team process.
Yep. So the intention when you have a student that qualifies for an out-of-district placement, it's a very lengthy process. It is, of course, all of our intention to service all our students within the schools of Nashoba Regional School. And that's really what most of our families would like and what most of our staff strive for. There are times, and this is decided through an evaluation cycle, so it's not taken lightly. There's a lot of evaluations and data collection that go into the decision for a student that can't be serviced within our current public school setting and require a really specialized school to meet their needs based on their disability. That decision is made by a team through the team process. And once the decision is made based on least restrictive environment, we then have a system where we have to make referrals out to schools that really have the ability to service that disability area that's identified through the team process. And we make the referrals. These out-of-district schools then review the referrals, and they decide based on their student population and their current programming if they can meet the needs of the students that we've referred to them. So it can be a lengthy process for families. At times, we will make a referral to a program that is then not accepted. So we need to move on to another school, which can also impact costs as we kind of make our way through the process. Like I said before, OSD sets the rates for every private special education school in the state of Massachusetts, and our collaboratives set their own rates based on their board that is made up typically of school committee, or the local school committee or superintendents will set those collaborative rates. And then we, once we make the referral, we're making a commitment to paying that tuition.
Thank you. I've been on the school committee for 5 years, and every year I have a question about this process, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may add one more thing.
Yes.
And this is a message for all of our community members, but particularly our families out there. The number one objective we have in student services and in identifying the correct programs for kids is making the decision that is right in the best interests of that student. And it is our moral and social obligation to do that, which is why these are budgetary priorities and they're mandates. They are mandates that we must fund. So as we are going to be working through this developmental process over the next couple of months, we have to remember we have to do that within the fixed construct of ensuring that we fund these very important programs for our students.
Kirk, when we have a student move into town who's already outplaced, don't we
Yeah.
have the right to evaluate whether or not we can provide service in-house when they arrive?
Mr. Mansh?
No, so we can through an evaluation cycle if the parent agrees to it. But if they have an existing accepted IEP, then we're required to supply those services. There are particular regulations in place based on when students move into a district. For example, if you move prior to April 1st, we would see that cost into the next fiscal year. If they move after April 1st, then you wouldn't see that tuition go into effect until the next fiscal year. The only exception to that is a collaborative placement. We pick that up automatically through the regulations. But an accepted IEP in Massachusetts is an accepted IEP in every city and town. So they have to, when a student moves in and we have an accepted IEP, we have to abide by that unless we make or are able to have another team decision with our existing team here in Nashoba.
And the state does do some increase in our Chapter 70 aid when we have one of these extraordinarily costly outplacements, right?
It's seen in our circuit breaker funding.
Excuse me, circuit breaker.
Yeah. So every year we apply to circuit breaker, which is there's always a foundation number that is we pay automatically. Right now it's in I believe it's about 51,000 that we pay automatically, and then after that we get reimbursed 75% of the tuition after that.
Sharon.
I just wanted to say these numbers are really hard, but thank you for putting the needs of the students first. Thank you for your commitment to that, to making sure that the kids get what they need above all else.
Jackie.
All right, I wanted to lower my hand. I would echo those statements, and I also am just curious. I think it's relative, not necessarily to this conversation tonight, but in what way can the district think about long-term increasing capacity around some of those contracted services so that we can defray the amount of outside contracted services that we have to pay on an annual basis? So just an observation.
Dr. Ryan, thank you for your comment. And as Mr. Manch mentioned in her entry process, that is something she is doing concurrently during this process.
All right, everybody, I see that it's 9:02. I'm noticing that we're probably going to need another 25 minutes at least. So I need 6 of us to stay. I know that on the YouTube channel, many people are watching. So can I just get a thumbs up that you're okay giving a little bit more of your time? I appreciate it, everyone. All right, so are there any more questions on student services? I don't think so. That's a lot, guys. I mean, obviously, I just want to reiterate, these are the line items that our towns want to pay attention to. This is non-discretionary spending. It's mandated by law. We are happy to do it, but this is a lot of the driver right here in the budget numbers. On to tech.
Okay, we're gonna walk through these last 2 departments rather quickly. So in our technology department, I want to welcome Sue Chi, who is our technology manager, who will be presenting his budget this evening. Go ahead, Chi.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for spending time with us at such late hour. I will try to make it quick as possible. So, how does the tech budget connect to the strategic plan? Obviously, like since most school operation nowadays use technology, or even rely on technology. So I would say almost everything we put in the budget somehow connected to the plan. And there are two areas I would like to point out, kind of the focus for next year. So the first one is about communication and data sharing. So currently, like the district and also school level, we still use a lot of programs that do not talk to each other, and the data sharing is really not that easy. So that is one area we try to change. We would like to build a much better integrated system so data can be shared more easily across different platforms. So the second one is about school safety and also somehow related to the communication as well. It's about the internet backup. So I already know like right now, pretty much everything is in the cloud online now. So has a reliable internet connection is pretty much #1 priority for tech operation. So for us, not sure if you guys know, like, later in the summer, start of the school year, like in the high school project, the fiber was cut, the internet was lost, for like twice. And, that has a big impact to our operation. So we try to avoid that. So we've been doing like some research and compare different solutions. So we were lucky enough to secure some hardware from Verizon. They have some internet gateway for.
Uh-oh. Chief Rose.
There's some irony in that.
There is a little bit.
That was a little bit of irony with the fiber optic cut.
He's at. I believe he's at home. Oh,
did I lose you guys? Sorry.
Yes, but we're glad you're back.
Go ahead.
Fiber, Chief.
Yeah.
So where did I lose you guys?
Well, I think you had just finished that we have now backup established internet connection so we can maintain our main offices.
So basically, we were able to secure some hardware this year. However, we need to continue budget for the service because those are like kind of a yearly cost, monthly cost, that kind of thing. So that's why, so we need to put in next year and also following years as well. Next slide, please. So new ask. So this is actually, it's not really a new position. It's more like a current position, take on more tasks. As more things like moving to the cloud, the way we provide support and also the skills level we need for the support is changing. We need people on the team has more skill level to doing like server network kind of task and also be able to do some config application, online applications. So that's why, we try to ask for this kind of additional responsibility and with a little bit extra pay. So next slide, please. So the cost change, you see some like a change on the hardware. There are a couple of reasons. The first one is since pandemic, the overall cost for all hardware has increased and never came down. That including the laptop, the tablet, the Chromebook for student, and also all the classroom projectors. Another big factor is last year we did not buy one-to-one Chromebooks for the third grade student because we were able to reuse some of the old device from previous purchase. And however, those devices, we don't think is sufficient enough to last another like 3 years. So basically you have to understand whenever we buy a grade book for third level, it's not just for 1 year, it's actually for 3-year use. So if we continue like do not buy third grade, so I think will kind of put us in some kind of risk. Another one is about the E-rate. I think Ross can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so a couple of pieces. For those of you who've been on the committee, during the pandemic, the district made a commitment to move to a 1-to-1 model for grades 3 through 5. Last year, we were able to wait on the third grade purchases just by using additional units that were already within the district. The problem with doing that over and over again is those units no longer can upgrade. They become too far out of date, and then therefore the student experience on the user end is not efficient, not functional, especially even when we get to MCAS. So, not that the machines are only for MCAS, but that's just an example. The district bought a significant amount of those Chromebooks during the pandemic using ESSER funds. As that has sunsetted, and we still have the 1-to-1 for grades 3 through 5. We do have the position that we're in today. Also, we're near the end of our 5-year E-rate cycle, which means we don't have as much availability of E-rate funding as we've had in the past. If you remember last year, we had a big boost of E-rate come in. During the year, we were able to pre-purchase some equipment because we had our return on the money that was spent during the pandemic. However, that's just not there. So it's not necessarily that our costs are as significant as the increase in the line says, but we also have the phenomenon of some grant funding obviously going away and the E-rate not being as available as it was in the past. Chi, I'll turn it back over to you for the software piece.
Okay, so you see some increase in the software. The majority of the increase are caused by we can't decide to further like a slide I discussed like in the previous. We want to build a better integrated platforms, so we kind of absorb a little bit more about different PowerSchool modules, so the data can talk to each other better. So that compared to what currently used, the cost increased quite a bit. And also overall for all the software, they're kind of a industry standard 5 to 8% increase every year. So that's why you see overall, there's some increase in the cost. So next slide.
So here's the entirety of the technology budget. That dollar change on the salaries includes the $15,000 increase for one of the positions to be moved to that senior position to take on more responsibilities. And obviously you can see the change, not just in the computer software and licensing that she just mentioned, but also the computer hardware that we described previously as well. Are there any questions with regards to the technology budget?
Any questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much for that, Suchi. We're going to move on to the athletics department.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, man of many hats. Time to put on my cleats and play athletic director here. So Tanya Rich, who is our amazing director of athletics, is unavailable this evening. She had family commitments amongst a couple other things. So I will quickly presenting her budget given the time of evening. So a couple things related to the strategic plan. I'm going to work from the bottom up. Obviously, Ms. Rich works really hard with her captains, her coaches, and her teams to make sure that they're involved in community service partnerships. Also from a professional development lens, making sure that our coaches and our staff within athletics understand our students. So they get some of that same training and athletic specific social emotional training so that we can work with our students beyond the bell. And then lastly, we're continuing to grow our pre-K through 12 identity. However, you'll see within the budget this year, there's no increase on our rebranding because we have extended all of the necessary rebranding that will not be part of the new building. So you won't see that in the budget for FY26. Some of the fees have to go up, obviously. And then we have a contract for transportation for athletics that's built in, and that's what that increased cost is. Again, this is the entirety of the budget. To Ms. Cohen's point earlier about stipends, you can see within those coaches' stipends and salaries, those are going up that exact 3.5% because that's related to the contract. Again, it's a stipend, does not have a step or a lane. It just goes up 3.5% each year. So I'll take any questions on the athletic budget.
I'm not seeing any, so it looks like we can keep going.
Okay. So this brings us to the entirety of the proposed budget for FY26. I thank the committee for their time and intention this evening. We're going to continue looking at the big picture. I know we're short on time, but this is where things get very important relative to increases on assessment and the work ahead. So as we've worked with the onboarding of the new high school debt and the construction that's happening to really be specific and separate this out. Our operating budget as of this evening is $73,217,999 as proposed in all the budgets you just saw. That is a 10.07% increase over FY25. Last year at this time, during the budget workshop, our budget increase for operating was a 6.91%, and we know that we walked that back a bit during that time. So to give you a sort of year-to-year comparison, at this time last year, we were about a 7% increase. So here are the voted budgets relative to the proposed budget this evening for operating. So you can see the steady increase with a slighter larger jump for the proposed FY26. You can see that relative to FY22, we had a lot happening with grants and things with COVID. But you can see over the last 3 years where we ended up for an increase was anywhere from 3.5% to almost 5.5% for an operating increase during those years. Revenues. So we've presented all of our expected expenses. Now we're going to talk about what the revenue sources would look like. As discussed earlier this evening, we are applying FY25 estimate or figures to our minimal local contribution, our Chapter 70 educational aid, what was appropriated from E&D in FY25, and then also our charter school and regional transportation reimbursements as revenue sources are set at FY25 levels. Again, like the superintendent said, we'll get updates on these through the governor's proposed budget next week and bring those forward in 2 weeks from tonight. So here's our estimated revenues. This is always the time of the slide deck. We sort of do a little bit of a working backwards. All of our assumptions applied in that FY26 column. That's where our town assessments would land, including our debt service. So this is the entirety of the budget. This is not just operating, but this also includes the debt service. And this is where this all gets broken down. I will just do a quick walkthrough. So our total proposed budget with all of the cost, including the debt, is that 80 million. Once you back out the high school debt, that decreases it. If you add in the local revenue, which includes our Chapter 70, it includes regional transportation reimbursement, those factors, what's left is $60 million. The fixed assessment, which comes from our minimal local contributions, which is set by the state, and we'll get updates on those as well over the next couple of weeks, as of FY25 was 30 million. We still need that FY26 update, but the remaining variable assessment is 29 million, subject to that 5-year rolling average for enrollment across the district per town. We'll see those foundation enrollment updates from the state as well and update those tables, which inevitably changes the information here. Again, we've worked really hard over the last few years to break out our operating assessment and our capital debt assessment. As of today, our operating assessments for each of the towns are shown here, Bolton at 12.52%, Lancaster at 14.11%, Stowe at 11.35%, meaning our all-member towns, the total change in the operating assessment across the district will be 12.57%. We know that those are numbers that we pay very close attention to over the next several weeks as we start to get in more information and look at what the impact on our towns will be. And as Superintendent Downing said at the kickoff today, we are not where we will be at the end of the budget season. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Downing at this point to walk through this slide.
So the challenge we have in the coming month is closing the gap, and what we need to determine is what is the size of the gap that we need to close. So you can see the 10.07 increase to the $73 million budget that is in the workshop numbers tonight. I asked Mr. Mulcairn to produce a table that would show by 1% increments what the dollar amount that would need to reduce in the budget to get to operating percentages that you see on the left. So as he explained earlier, last 3 years, we've operated between 3.5% to 5.5% increases. So looking to that direction, you could see if we set targets of getting to 4% or 5% in the operational budget, it would take a reduction off of tonight's budget of $3.3 to $4 million. So I hope this table illuminates for our committee and for all of our residents and our employees out there the challenge that is before us in these coming days. And these budget gaps are closed through two methods. That is adjustments to increase revenues and reductions to cost. And as we get more information over the coming weeks on those, we certainly will get closer to that number. But we're looking to this committee to think about what are the levels that we are comfortable taking to our towns and asking for in this year's budget. And because we know that we're going to have to be very creative in delivering a high quality educational program that also is a fiscally responsible budget that we put forward to our towns. Mr. Mulcairn?
Yep. So as Superintendent Downing just mentioned, on the revenue side, when we get our update from the governor's proposed budget, we will update our Chapter 70 education aid, transportation reimbursement, and charter school reimbursement. We'll also have information on our foundation enrollment, which impacts our assessments, as well as that minimum local contribution, which is set by the state. The school district, the school committee, the administrative team have no bearing or impact on what the minimum local contribution is for each of our towns. That is managed by the state. As I mentioned, insurance and benefits, we're going to get updated information and bring that to light as we get it through our budget updates. But again, we can expect our final rates for that health insurance piece, which is our major cost in that cost center, to be sometime in mid-February. And then also we expect to have our excess and deficiency certification coming in relatively soon. I reached out to the Department of Revenue 2 weeks ago. We're in the queue. We're close. She thought she might have it by the end of last week. We're not there yet, obviously, because we've not received that back yet. But my hope is by the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to tell you exactly what our excess and deficiency certification is, which is necessary for us to consider an appropriation to the FY26 budget. Superintendent Downing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mulcairn. As I shared through the superintendent's report tonight, communication with the town officials on that budget process is underway. And we, as you know, we meet regularly with our TAs, but we've extended those conversations to our FinComs and select chairs. And so we'll continue those conversations as we go through this process. I know the Budget and Warrant Subcommittee will be reviewing the budgets, and Mr. Mulcairn will lead the district's effort in drilling down in some of these considerations. And then we got to look at reductions and offsets over the coming weeks to see how that can help us close the gap. We will update the budget on January 29th, as this, again, will be a large agenda item for us on the 29th as more information comes in. So, next slide. Madam Chair, it's with that I'm happy to say we have concluded with this. As they say, we did 2.5 hours of setup for what was a 10-minute punchline. But I hope this illuminates for our committee the challenge that's in front of us. And we look forward to your partnership in the coming weeks.
I have a quick clarifying question on slide 84, Ross.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, so can you tell me as I'm pulling up the screen share again?
Yeah, so it's like the third to the last slide, something like that. It's color coded and it's called projected assessment by town.
Sure, hang on 1 second.
It's
Yep.
right above that one, yeah. So it says there in the bottom right corner that the operating budget assessment for all member towns is at 12%, but isn't it 10%?
No, that's the operating increase. After all of our factors of revenue are put into place, the actual assessment is not the same as the operating change.
Is the increase.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
Because,
so then
because we have our total proposed budget, less debt, less Chapter 70, regional transportation reimbursement, et cetera, then there's that, and then whatever the minimum local contributions are, and then the variable assessment. So there's a number of factors that go into that, but that's the totality of it.
okay. And so I'm looking at the next slide where you show the potential reduction scenarios. And so in order to get down to our historic high or our recent high of 5%, we would have to cut the budget by 3.3 million. And I have to assume that we were just talking about the third grade classrooms being at 24 students and how, that's as high as we would ever want it to go. But if we're going to cut an additional $3.3 million from this budget, I have to imagine that would impact class size across the entire district, across every grade level. I mean, is that fair to say? Just, I'm trying to project out here what a 3.3 million reduction looks like. I know my town is dealing with it, and they're projecting something like 50, could equal something like 40 to 50 positions.
Yeah.
So, towns are all different, but that's a gigantic number to get down to 5%. And
Madam,
yeah.
For us to get to the 5% level, it will require a reduction in positions. And that's why we're going to have internal conversations and prioritize those things. And you look to the classroom last. However, you have to fund positions to execute your district. Buildings have to have principals as a basic sort of example. We have to have guidance counselors. We have to have custodians. We have to have all those things that support a system. So that is going to be the challenge. It's tough for me to say directly in terms of class size standards, Madam Chair. Today, we are going to have a much better sense of how to answer that question on January 29th once we have those other factors come in.
Okay, so.
But Madam Chair, I think your projection that I'm assuming in your question is very reasonable. That for us to get to $3.3 million in reductions, to get to even a 5% operational increase, it is going to take the reduction of positions in the school system to get there. So that means all new asks would be taken off the table, and we would have to include additional positions that are currently in our school system.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the school committee? I know that this is just a starting place. We're going to hear more on the 29th. Everybody's tired and perhaps not very happy about what's happening right now. At the state level, frankly, there's some situations that we're compelled to deal with that it's really just not right what the state government is doing. So, Amy.
Yeah, so on the 29th, we'll have, this number is going to adjust with regardless because we'll have more information about revenues and projections and costs and like a lot more information to kind of fine tune that number. But at that time, when will we get an idea of what it would look like to start getting to see some of those scenarios play out to get that percentage increase lower? Is that after January 29th? Like once you've gotten some refined?
Well, we will bring some of that to you on January 29th. The previous budget iterations, if you remember, we had 3 consecutive meetings where we did that. However, we were in a tighter time crunch due to the new governor's budget at the time. So we're going to be looking at bringing some of those to you in the next time. Madam Chair, you mentioned 5%. And so we can model out based on information to date on the 29th, what would be necessary to get to that level. I would be hesitant to mention specific roles on that date, but we certainly can do position equivalencies to get to that place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's essential, and perhaps the committee agrees that we don't have a lot of time to work out these scenarios. So as much as you can do that on the 29th, that would be great.
So we will build a target scenario to that 5% operational increase to bring further context to this committee.
Scott, did you have your hand? Oh,
that's
go ahead.
That's not what we're saying will be the budget, but that is to give us context on what we need to execute.
Scott?
I do, but Amy might be ahead of me.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So I'm just the operating budget right now does not include any potential use of excess and deficiencies. Is that correct?
That is correct. We used last year's number of $1.4 million. So those are the types of levers we can look at to make adjustments.
Wait, you lost me there. Did you say your current budget assumes we do use 1.4 million in excess and deficiencies?
Yeah, that's on the revenue slide. You'll see the FY26 replicates the FY25 voted budget.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
we could increase that, which perhaps is one of the levers you'll use on the 29th, Kirk.
I think we bring options to the committee. So we will show you what those options look like.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, 5% would be, like you said, significant reductions. I guess I'm wanting something a little back from that. Like that's not quite that drastic. Are you going to present like a couple of things? Scenarios, not just the nuclear one. All right, you know what I'm trying to say? That because that would be probably 50 cuts, right? So are you going to present something that's a little less drastic, I guess I would say?
Ms. Vessels, I think what we'll do is, as we build those, Mr. Mulcair and I have already done some strategy on this. We'll put it into buckets and show you what the cost is in reducing those buckets.
All right, thanks.
Could I add on, Superintendent Downing? I just and to the chair, just as a follow-up to Ms. Vessels, I think she mentioned, and maybe I just misheard with the time of the evening, but I think she said 50 positions. I want to be clear that we're not necessarily labeling any positions or amounts because of the fact that we need to understand our revenue and what other associated costs within the operating budget could be adjusted before we start to look at personnel. I just want to be very clear that taking an estimated salary and looking at the reduction number and making an assumption on positions is not a good place to be. I understand your thinking. I just want to be very sort of clear with the committee that's not necessarily where that would land if we did look at 3.3 million. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ross. That's very premature. Here's one thing that I just wanted to put on the table very quickly. Sometimes I hear rhetoric from various leaders that the public schools, it almost feels like the public schools are a problem, and that this exercise is frustrating to them. But I would just remind everybody that we all are neighbors and we all live in these towns. None of us want our taxes to go up, but the public schools are the lifeblood of our communities. And this is why this is, one of the most important entities, period. And so funding them is important. That said, we recognize that people are on fixed incomes. We have this high school that needs to be built. Infrastructure has not been a focus at the high school level for a long time. And so there is a balance that needs to be struck, but it needs to be fair, and we need to work as a team and not point fingers at each other going forward. So I hope that anybody who's watching or listening recognizes that this committee, although responsible for creating this budget under the leadership of our professionals, recognizes all of the pressures that everyone is under. We are also under those pressures as residents. So I just want to put that out there, that we're all on the same team and that this is not a competition. It's not a war. It's not a battle. We need to come to terms with it and create compromise in the spirit of nourishing our kids, all of them. Sharon.
I think that this builds on what you were saying a little bit, Leah. But I guess what I'm thinking is I'd like to hear too, if just some information about what the benefit of the investment, because I'm just going to use an example. It's a very simple example, but a request for tutors for the elementary schools. So that is a cost. It's an increased cost. But there's a benefit from that investment in our kids as well. And so in addition to seeing the information on what it takes to bring the numbers down and the percentages down. I'm also interested to and I know this is hard to quantify because you're projecting into the future, but I do think it's worth it to think about the investment that these things put into our kids and how we recoup that in the future. And so again, I don't know how easy it is to quantify it, but I am interested in hearing that part of it as well.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, everybody. Any final comments? This is definitely to be continued. So I want to thank all of our administrative team, first of all, for being here. I can see that many of you guys are still in your offices. I know Ross got there at 5 a.m. So thank you to all of you for all of your hard work. It obviously doesn't stop here. We really appreciate all of the people over there at Emerson and all the work you guys do. It's very much appreciated. So thank you. Kirk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just saw our colleague Renan appear on screen. Let's recognize Renan for all the hard work. He does a lot of the numbers work that goes into what we presented to you tonight under the direction of Mr. Mulcairn. I just want to emphasize something that I always tell this committee. I'm just saying it again. Your feedback, your questions, all those things are important. Please, if you have them, get them to the chair. Ms. Viverito and I talk regularly. She will forward those questions to us for our consideration. This is going to be important over the next couple of weeks so that when we come to you on the 29th, we're coming to you with thoughts around the ideas that are ruminating around your own thoughts. So please forward those requests to Madam Chair for us. Thank you.
All right, guys. So the only item.
Can I build on that, Leah?
Oh, sure.
For members of the community, I would encourage them to reach out to their school committee representatives with their thoughts on, you know, what's been proposed and the idea of having to strip $3 million from this budget, because we are here to represent the community. So I would just put that out there that I would like to hear from my community members on this.
Agreed. Yep. Great reminder. So the only item left on the agenda, guys, is just looking at items for the next agenda. So the planning calendar is here for you. If you guys want to look at it and get back to me and let me know if there's anything that you'd like to see on there, but we're obviously going to have a budget update. We're going to have another policy first reading. So another one of those big initiatives from Amy's subcommittee. We're also starting to look at the district calendar for the following school year. We have a little bit of Dear Jay work to do, etc. Program of studies is also going to be shared with us. There is a bullet item there that says subcommittee goals check-in. I'm actually going to bump that out because I think we agreed to do kind of a 2-year goal cycle. And so that formative check-in really can be moved maybe even out to April, Alita. So if you want to bump that. And then, yeah, just budget update stuff. So if there's nothing that you guys want to share now, or if there is, just raise your hand. All right, but you can also email me if you have something that comes up. But if that's it, I'm going to move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Nice, Jackie. Well done. I saw that. So let's take the vote. Scott?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Amy Vessels?
Yes.
Robin?
Yes.
Jackie?
Yes.
Shondor?
Yes.
Amy Cohen?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Lindsay?
Yes.
And Joe?
Yes.